Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of Glastonbury Mountain, Vermont, during what was supposed to be a restorative weekend hiking trip with my closest friends from college. The four of us, myself, Tessa Wright, Daniela Parker, and Marcus Edwards, had been planning this trip for months. We'd all been working ourselves to death at the same marketing firm in Boston, and this 3-day weekend was meant to be our escape from the crushing deadlines and impossible client demands. I'd been having panic attacks at work. Tessa had developed insomnia. Daniela was drinking too much, and Marcus had grown so thin his clothes hung off him like he was a scarecrow. We needed this. None of us were experienced hikers, but Daniela had done some research and found a trail on Glastonbury Mountain that sounded perfect. Challenging enough to make us feel accomplished, but not so difficult that we'd be in over our heads. Glastonbury Mountain is part of Vermont's Green Mountain National Forest, and it has a certain reputation among locals. The area is sometimes called Vermont's Bermuda Triangle because of the number of disappearances that have occurred there over the years. Daniela mentioned this fact casually over dinner the night before we left, and we all laughed it off as local superstition. We should have paid more attention. The drive from Boston took about 3 hours. We arrived at the trailhead around noon on Friday, our car packed with new camping gear we'd splurged on for the trip: a 4-person tent, sleeping bags, a portable stove, water filters, and enough trail mix to feed a small army. The weather was perfect. Clear blue skies, a gentle breeze, and temperatures in the mid-60s. "This is exactly what I needed," Tessa said, stretching her arms over her head as she climbed out of the car. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore a brand new hiking outfit, the tags of which she'd cut off just that morning. "God, the air smells amazing," Marcus added, taking a deep breath. He looked better already, his perpetually worried expression relaxing as he gazed up at the dense forest surrounding the small gravel parking lot. "No cell service, though," he added, checking his phone. "That's the point," Daniela said, hoisting her backpack out of the trunk. 3 days of digital detox. We're going full Thoreau." I nodded in agreement, but something about the forest made me uneasy. I'd grown up in a city, and while I'd always romanticized nature, the reality of it, the vastness, the stillness, the indifference, was more overwhelming than I'd anticipated. The trees seemed to loom over us, their branches reaching like fingers across the sky. "You okay, Sarah?" Marcus asked, noticing my hesitation. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile, just taking it all in. We shouldered our packs and consulted the trail map Daniela had printed out. Our plan was to hike about 5 miles that day to a camping area near Fayville Pond, spend the night there, then continue another 7 miles the next day to reach the summit of Glastonbury Mountain. We'd camp near the old fire tower at the peak, then hike back down on Sunday. The first mile was pleasant. The trail was well maintained, with wooden planks crossing over the muddier sections and occasional markers confirming we were on the right path. We chatted easily, pointing out interesting plants and stopping to take photos of each other against the backdrop of ancient trees and moss-covered rocks. But as we continued, the trail gradually became less defined. The markers grew farther apart, and twice we had to backtrack after realizing we'd wandered off the path. The trees grew denser, blocking out more of the sunlight, and the cheerful atmosphere of our group began to fade. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" I asked Daniela after we'd been hiking for 3 hours and the pond was nowhere in sight. She consulted her map, turning it this way and that, her brow furrowed. "We should be close," she said, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. By late afternoon, we were all tired and growing concerned. According to the map, we should have reached the pond hours ago. The shadows were lengthening, and none of us relished the idea of setting up camp in the dark. "Let's take a break," Marcus suggested, dropping his pack on a fallen log. I need to refill my water anyway." We all sat down gratefully, our legs aching from the unaccustomed exertion. As I drank from my water bottle, I noticed something strange in the distance, a flash of movement among the trees, too quick to identify. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing. The others looked where I was pointing, but whatever I'd seen was gone. "Probably just a deer," Tessa said, but she sounded uncertain. We rested for about 15 minutes, then resumed our hike. The trail grew steeper, and we had to help each other up some of the rockier sections. The strain was beginning to show on all of us. Tessa, usually the most upbeat of our group, had fallen silent, and Marcus's worried expression had returned. Finally, just as I was about to suggest we turn back and try to find our way to the car before dark, we crested a hill and saw water gleaming through the trees. "That has to be it," Daniela said, relief evident in her voice. "Fayville Pond." We hurried forward, eager to reach our destination, but as we drew closer, I realized something was wrong. This wasn't a pond. It was much larger, more like a small lake, and according to Daniela's map, there shouldn't have been any lakes in the area. "This isn't right," I said, stopping abruptly. Daniela checked the map again, her face pale. "It's not on here," she admitted, "but maybe the map is outdated, or maybe this is a different pond." We stood there, uncertain as the sun sank lower in the sky. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were lost. "Look," Marcus said suddenly, pointing to the far shore of the lake. "There's a cabin over there." Squinting, I could just make out a small structure partially hidden among the trees, a dark, weathered cabin with a sagging porch. Smoke curled from its chimney, suggesting occupancy. "We should go ask for directions," Tessa suggested, already starting around the edge of the lake. "Wait," I said, grabbing her arm. "We don't know who's there. What if they're—" I trailed off, not wanting to voice my concerns. "What, some kind of backwoods serial killer?" Tessa laughed. "This isn't a horror movie, Sarah." But even as she said it, I could see the doubt in her eyes. We were miles from anywhere, lost in unfamiliar territory, and the day was waning. We didn't have many options. "We stick together," Daniela decided. "All of us go, or none of us." We circled the lake, our pace slow due to exhaustion and the increasingly uneven terrain. As we drew closer to the cabin, details came into focus: the warped wooden planks of the porch, the small garden plot to one side, the axe embedded in a chopping block. It looked both lived in and neglected, as if its occupant did the bare minimum to maintain it. Before we could reach the door, it swung open, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall and thin, with a gray beard that reached the middle of his chest. He wore faded overalls and a flannel shirt despite the warm weather, and his eyes were pale blue, almost colorless in the fading light. "You folks lost," he called out, his voice rough with age or disuse. We exchanged glances, and Daniela stepped forward. "Yes, sir. We were trying to reach the camping area near Fayville Pond, but I think we took a wrong turn." The old man studied us for a moment, then gestured for us to come closer. "This here's Glackenberry Lake," he said. "Fayville's about 3 miles east, but you don't want to try finding it in the dark. These woods can be tricky at night." There was something in his tone that sent a chill down my spine, a warning that went beyond the practical concern of hiking in darkness. "I'm Howard Blackwood," he continued. "Been living here most of my life. You folks are welcome to camp on my property tonight. If you want, there's a clearing just yonder that's suitable." He pointed to a flat area between his cabin and the lake. We introduced ourselves, and after a brief discussion among our group, accepted his offer. It wasn't ideal, but it seemed safer than wandering through the woods at dusk. As we set up our tent in the clearing, I couldn't shake the feeling that Howard was watching us from his cabin window. Every time I glanced in that direction, though, there was no one there. Once our camp was established, Howard invited us onto his porch for tea. We accepted, partly out of politeness and partly because, despite his unsettling demeanor, he seemed to be our best source of local information. The inside of Howard's cabin was exactly what you'd expect. A single large room with a wood stove in the center, a small kitchen area, a table with 4 mismatched chairs, and a narrow bed in one corner. The walls were hung with animal pelts and old photographs. It smelled of wood smoke, herbs, and something else I couldn't identify, something sour and organic. Howard served us tea in chipped mugs. It had a strange, bitter taste that none of us commented on. As we sipped, he told us about the area. "Glastonbury Mountain has a history," he said, staring into his mug. "Indigenous folks called it a cursed place. Said there was something in these woods that wasn't right, something that could change its shape, lure people off the trails, make them turn against each other." "Like what? A spirit?" Tessa asked, her voice skeptical but intrigued. Howard's pale eyes fixed on her. "Some call it the Bennington Monster. Others say it's a Wendigo. Me, I don't put names to it. Names give things power." "But you believe there's something out there?" Marcus asked. Howard's gaze shifted to the window, where darkness had now fallen completely. "I know there is. Seen what it can do. Back in '83, a family of 5 went hiking not far from here. Only one came back. The youngest girl, maybe 6 years old, found her wandering the road 3 days later, covered in blood. Wouldn't speak for months, and when she finally did, she said her daddy had gone strange. Started talking to someone none of them could see. Then one night he took the axe to her mama and brothers while they slept." My stomach turned at the gruesome story. "What happened to the girl?" I asked. "State took her away. Last I heard, she was in some institution up north." Howard sipped his tea. "Course, that's just one story. Been dozens of disappearances over the years. Some bodies found, some not. The ones they do find, though—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "What about them?" Daniela pressed. "Wrong," Howard said simply. "Just wrong. Like something's been living inside them, wearing their skin like a suit that don't quite fit." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Outside, I could hear the wind picking up, rustling through the trees surrounding the cabin. "Well," Marcus said finally, setting down his empty mug, "we should probably get some rest if we're going to find our way back to the trail tomorrow." Howard nodded. "I can point you in the right direction in the morning. But a word of advice. Stay in your tent tonight no matter what you hear, and if one of you needs to go out for any reason, wake the others. Don't go alone." We thanked Howard for the tea and his hospitality, then returned to our tent. None of us spoke much as we prepared for bed, but I could tell we were all thinking about Howard's stories. "He's just trying to scare us," Tessa said finally as we settled into our sleeping bags. "You know how locals like to mess with tourists." "Probably," Daniela agreed, though she didn't sound convinced. I lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind had grown stronger, and the tent walls flapped rhythmically. Beyond that, I could hear the gentle lapping of water against the lake shore and the occasional hoot of an owl. Normal night sounds, I told myself. Nothing to be afraid of. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a scream. It took me a moment to realize it had come from outside the tent, not from one of my friends. The cry was high-pitched and inhuman, somewhere between a woman's scream and an animal's shriek. It seemed to come from the direction of the lake. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart pounding, but my companions slept on, undisturbed. I sat up, straining to hear. For several minutes there was nothing but the wind and the water. Then it came again. That terrible scream, closer this time. I reached over and shook Tessa awake. "Listen," I hissed. She blinked at me groggily. "What?" "There's something out there. I heard a scream." We waited, but the sound didn't repeat itself. After a minute, Tessa yawned. "Probably just an animal, Sarah. Go back to sleep." But I couldn't. I lay there, every muscle tense, waiting for the sound to come again. Instead, I heard something else. Footsteps, squelching in the mud near our tent. They circled once, twice, then stopped directly in front of the entrance. I held my breath, watching the zippered opening of the tent. A shadow fell across it, a human silhouette, but somehow wrong. Too tall, too thin, the proportions subtly distorted. Then a voice called out, Howard's voice, but strained as if he were in pain or speaking through gritted teeth. "Help me," the voice said. "Please, I'm hurt. I need help." I should have woken the others. I should have remembered Howard's warning. But in my sleep-addled state, all I could think was that our host was injured and needed assistance. I crawled to the tent entrance and unzipped it just enough to peer out. Howard stood there, his tall frame illuminated by moonlight. But something was wrong. His posture was stiff, unnatural, and his head was cocked at an impossible angle. And his eyes, his pale blue eyes, had turned entirely black, like pools of oil. "Help me," he said again, but his lips barely moved, and the voice seemed to come from somewhere behind him. I screamed then, a sound that finally woke the others. As they stirred in confusion, I scrambled backward away from the tent opening. "What is it?" Marcus demanded, grabbing my shoulders. "Howard," I gasped. "There's something wrong with him." But when Daniela shone her flashlight out the tent opening, there was no one there. Just empty darkness and the soft sound of receding footsteps. None of us slept after that. We sat huddled in our sleeping bags, flashlights on, jumping at every sound from the forest. As dawn approached, Daniela suggested we pack up and leave as soon as it was light enough to see. "What about Howard?" Tessa asked. "What about him?" Daniela replied, her voice hard. "That thing last night wasn't Howard." "We don't know that," Marcus argued. "Maybe he was sleepwalking or drunk or just messing with us." But I knew what I had seen, and it wasn't any of those things. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the trees, we emerged cautiously from our tent. The clearing was empty, the lake surface still and reflective in the early morning light. Howard's cabin stood silent, no smoke rising from its chimney. We packed up quickly, eager to be away from this place. Just as we were about to leave, I felt compelled to check on Howard, to make sure he was all right, or to confirm that what I'd seen hadn't been him at all. "I'll be right back," I told the others, ignoring their protests as I approached the cabin. The door was ajar. I knocked anyway, calling out Howard's name. When there was no response, I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The cabin was empty. The wood stove was cold, the tea mugs from the night before still sitting unwashed on the table. It looked as if Howard had simply walked out and not returned. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small door in the far corner that I hadn't noticed the previous evening. It was slightly open, revealing a set of stairs leading down into darkness. I hesitated, knowing I should rejoin my friends, but curiosity drove me forward. I took out my flashlight and directed its beam down the stairs. The light revealed a basement room with a dirt floor. It was mostly empty except for shelves along one wall holding mason jars filled with unidentifiable substances, and a large wooden trunk in the center of the room. Against my better judgment, I descended the stairs. The air was cold and damp, with that same sour smell I'd noticed upstairs, but stronger now. I approached the trunk slowly, my flashlight beam dancing across its weathered surface. The trunk was old, bound with rusted metal straps. A heavy padlock secured its lid, but the lock hung open, as if someone had recently accessed the contents. I should have left then. I should have run back to my friends and insisted we get as far away from this place as possible. Instead, I reached out and lifted the lid of the trunk. The smell hit me first, a wave of decay so powerful I staggered backward, gagging. When I could breathe again, I forced myself to look inside. There, folded neatly as if they were laundry, were clothes, overalls and flannel shirts identical to what Howard had been wearing, but they were stiff with dried blood and other fluids. And beneath them was something worse, a collection of personal effects that didn't belong together. Wallets, watches, wedding rings, driver's licenses with different names and faces, a child's backpack, a woman's necklace, trophies. I dropped the lid and ran, taking the stairs two at a time in my haste to escape. As I burst out of the cabin, I collided with Marcus, who had come to look for me. "We need to leave," I gasped, clutching his arm. "Now." "What happened?" he demanded, but I just shook my head, unable to articulate the horror I'd discovered. We rejoined Tessa and Daniela, and I managed to convey enough of what I'd seen to convince them we needed to get away from the cabin immediately. We shouldered our packs and set off around the lake, away from Howard's property, hoping to find a trail that would lead us back to civilization. The day was overcast, the sky a uniform gray that made it difficult to determine direction. We had Daniela's map, but without knowing exactly where we were, it wasn't much help. We decided to follow the shore of the lake until we found a trail or road. As we walked, I told the others what I'd found in Howard's basement. "I think he's a killer," I concluded. "All those disappeared hikers. He must live out here and prey on lost people like us." "But where is he now?" Tessa asked, glancing nervously over her shoulder. None of us had an answer to that. We walked for hours, the lake seemingly much larger than it had appeared the previous evening. The shore was often marshy or overgrown, forcing us to detour through the forest. The trees pressed close, their branches interlacing overhead to form a canopy that blocked much of the already dim light. Around midday, we stopped for a brief rest and to eat some of our trail mix. As we sat on fallen logs, catching our breath, I noticed Marcus staring intently into the forest. "What is it?" I asked. "I thought I saw someone," he said quietly. "Just for a second, between those trees over there." We all looked where he was pointing, but there was nothing to see except the endless trunks of birch and pine. "We should keep moving," Daniela said, standing up. "I don't like this place." None of us did, but we were beginning to fear we might be trapped here. The lake seemed to have no outlet, no connecting streams or rivers that might lead to more traveled areas. And the forest surrounding it was dense and disorienting, with no clear paths. As the afternoon wore on, fatigue began to take its toll. We'd had little sleep the night before, and the constant state of anxiety was draining. Tessa developed a blister on her heel that slowed our progress, and Daniela admitted that her water filter wasn't working properly, meaning our clean water supply was limited. Worst of all, though none of us would say it aloud, was the growing sense that we were being watched. More than once, I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow slipping between trees, a branch swaying against the wind. When I would turn to look directly, there was never anything there. Finally, as the gray daylight began to fade toward evening, we spotted what looked like a trail leading away from the lake. It was narrow and overgrown, but definitely man-made. "Should we follow it?" Marcus asked, voicing the question we were all considering. The trail led into the densest part of the forest, away from the relative openness of the lakeshore. If it didn't lead to safety, we could become even more lost. But staying by the lake meant another night in proximity to Howard's cabin, or whatever had been pretending to be Howard. "I say we try it," Daniela decided. "We can't just keep walking in circles around this lake." With no better options, we agreed and set off down the trail. It wound through ancient trees, their trunks massive and gnarled. The going was difficult. Fallen branches and tangled roots threatened to trip us at every step. But we pressed on, driven by the desperate hope that this path would lead us back to civilization. As darkness began to fall, the forest grew quiet. Too quiet. The bird calls and insect chirps that had provided a constant background to our journey suddenly ceased, leaving an eerie silence broken only by our labored breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. "We should make camp," Marcus suggested, his voice hushed. "It's not safe to keep going in the dark." We found a small clearing just off the trail and began to set up our tent. As Tessa and I worked on securing the rainfly, a twig snapped in the forest nearby, a sharp sound that cut through the silence like a gunshot. We all froze, turning toward the source of the noise. The trees at the edge of the clearing seemed to shift and blur, as if something was moving behind them, weaving in and out of the shadows. "Hello?" Daniela called out, her voice wavering. "Is someone there?" For a long moment there was no response. Then, from the darkness between two massive pines, Howard stepped into view. But it wasn't Howard, not really. His body was the same, but his movements were jerky and uncoordinated, like a puppet on strings. And his face. His face was a grotesque parody of human expression, the features stretching and contracting in ways that should have been physically impossible. "Found you," he said, but the voice was all wrong, higher, lilting, almost childlike. Marcus grabbed a large branch from the ground, holding it like a club. "Stay back," he warned. Howard, or the thing that looked like Howard, cocked its head at an unnatural angle, regarding us with those oil-black eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," it said in that wrong voice. "This is my forest, my feeding ground." "What are you?" Tessa whispered, her face pale with terror. The thing wearing Howard's skin grinned, the expression splitting its face almost literally, the corners of its mouth extending far beyond what should have been possible. "I am hunger," it said. "I am the hollow place within you that can never be filled. I am the voice that whispers to you in the dark, telling you to do terrible things." It took a step forward, and Howard's body seemed to ripple, the skin flowing like wax. For just an instant, I saw something else beneath the human disguise, something composed of angles that shouldn't exist, of limbs that bent in impossible directions, of a face that was not a face at all, but a void where features should be. Marcus threw his branch, striking the creature squarely in the chest. It stumbled backward, momentarily surprised. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing his pack. We didn't need to be told twice. Abandoning our half-assembled tent, we grabbed what supplies we could and bolted down the trail, away from the clearing and the horror that stood within it. I could hear it pursuing us. Not the sound of human footsteps, but something else. A rapid, scuttling noise like an enormous insect moving through the underbrush. The darkness made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead, and several times we nearly ran off the trail into the dense forest. "There," Daniela gasped suddenly, pointing. Up ahead, barely visible in the gloom, was a structure, a small stone building with a peaked roof. We made for it at a dead run, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind us. As we drew closer, I could see it was an old fire lookout station, its windows dark and empty, its door hanging ajar. We burst inside, slamming the door shut behind us. Marcus and I pushed a heavy desk against it, while Tessa and Daniela searched frantically for anything that could serve as a weapon or barricade. The interior of the lookout was a single room, dusty and long abandoned. A metal staircase led up to what must have been the observation level. There was little furniture besides the desk, just an old chair, a filing cabinet, and a pot-bellied stove in one corner. "We need light," Tessa said, her voice shaking. She rummaged in her pack and produced a headlamp, switching it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating our temporary refuge. For a moment, we thought we'd found safety. Then we saw the walls. They were covered with symbols, hundreds of them, drawn in what looked like dried blood and other substances I didn't want to identify. Spirals, stick figures, eyes and shapes I couldn't name, all arranged in patterns that hurt to look at, as if they existed in more dimensions than my brain could process. "What is this place?" Marcus whispered, staring at the grotesque artwork. Before anyone could answer, something slammed against the door, making the desk shudder. We backed away, clustering in the center of the room. "The stairs," Daniela suggested, pointing to the metal staircase. "Maybe there's a way out up there." With no better options, we ascended the narrow steps to the observation level. It was a small octagonal room with windows on all sides, designed to provide a 360-degree view of the surrounding forest. Most of the glass was broken now, and the cold night air rushed in through the empty frames. Another crash came from below, louder this time. The thing was breaking through. "What do we do?" Tessa asked, her eyes wide with fear. I looked around desperately for anything that might help us. The observation room was mostly empty except for an old metal cabinet in one corner. I yanked it open, hoping for a weapon or radio, anything that might save us. Inside was a single object, a book, its leather cover cracked and faded with age. I grabbed it, flipping it open to find yellowed pages covered in handwritten text. "Sarah, this isn't the time for reading," Marcus snapped, but something made me continue turning the pages. The book was a journal, kept by someone named Thomas Blackwood. The entries dated back to the 1940s and detailed his time as a fire lookout on Glastonbury Mountain. But they quickly devolved from routine observations about weather and wildlife to increasingly disturbed ramblings about voices in the forest, shapes that moved wrong, and a hunger that was consuming him from the inside out. The final entry, dated October 17, 1947, read simply, "It's in me now. God forgive what I am about to become." The name Blackwood struck me like a physical blow. "Howard," I said. "Howard Blackwood. This must be his father or grandfather." "Sarah." Daniela's urgent voice cut through my thoughts. She was standing by one of the broken windows, pointing down. "Look." From our elevated position, we could see what we hadn't been able to from the ground. The lookout station stood at the center of an enormous symbol, a spiral that had been carved into the forest itself. Trees had been felled or bent to create the pattern, visible now in the faint moonlight breaking through the clouds. "It's a trap," I realized aloud. "The trail led us here on purpose." Another crash from below, and then the sound of splintering wood as the door finally gave way. Heavy footsteps ascended the metal stairs, slow, deliberate steps that made the entire structure shudder. We pressed ourselves against the far wall of the observation room, as far from the staircase as possible. I still held the journal, clutching it like a talisman against the darkness. The thing that had once been Howard Blackwood reached the top of the stairs. In the moonlight streaming through the broken windows, its true form was finally visible. It was still vaguely humanoid, but the proportions were all wrong. Limbs too long and jointed in extra places, torso twisted and bulging with shapes that moved beneath the skin. Its face was the worst part, features sliding and reforming constantly, never settling into anything recognizable as human, except for those terrible black eyes that remained fixed on us. "So hungry," it said in that childlike voice. "Been so long since I had such a feast." It moved forward, its body flowing rather than stepping. Marcus threw the chair at it, but the creature barely noticed, batting the makeshift projectile aside with a limb that suddenly extended like a whip. We were trapped, backs against the windows, nowhere left to run. The creature seemed to sense our despair and paused, savoring the moment. That's when I remembered something from the journal. A passage about how Thomas Blackwood had tried to destroy the entity. "Fire," he'd written. "It fears the fire. The pot-bellied stove downstairs. If we could somehow lure the creature down there, trap it somehow." I locked eyes with Daniela, hoping she'd understand. "The stove," I whispered. "Fire." Her eyes widened in recognition and she gave a slight nod. "Hey," she shouted suddenly, stepping forward. "You want us? Come and get us." She darted to the side, toward the staircase. The creature's attention shifted to her, its head swiveling unnaturally. As it turned, I shoved the journal into my pack and motioned to Tessa and Marcus. "When it follows her down, we go too," I hissed. "The stove. We need to light it." The creature lunged for Daniela, but she was quick, ducking under its grasping limbs and bolting down the stairs. It pursued her, its body contorting to fit down the narrow stairwell. As soon as they disappeared below, we followed, moving as quietly as possible. I could hear Daniela below, taunting the creature, leading it away from the stairs. We descended to find Daniela backing slowly toward the far wall, the creature advancing on her with that terrible fluidity. Seizing our chance, we darted toward the pot-bellied stove. Marcus yanked open its small door while I fumbled in my pack for matches. The sound caught the creature's attention. It turned, seeing us by the stove, and let out a noise that was part shriek, part hiss. It abandoned Daniela and rushed toward us. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely strike the match, but finally it caught, the small flame dancing in the darkness. I threw it into the stove, onto the pile of old papers and broken chair pieces Marcus had hurriedly stuffed inside. The fire caught immediately, the dry material blazing up. The creature recoiled, a sound like radio static emanating from where its mouth should have been. It backed away toward the door it had broken through. "It's working," Tessa exclaimed, but our victory was short-lived. The creature, recovering from its initial fear, changed tactics. Instead of fleeing, it began to circle the room, keeping its distance from the stove but blocking our exit. "We need more fire," I said, looking around frantically. My gaze fell on Daniela's pack, which she'd dropped when she ran down the stairs. "Daniela, do you still have that bottle of whiskey?" She nodded, understanding immediately. We always brought a small bottle of whiskey on our trips, a tradition from our college days. She retrieved it from her pack and tossed it to me. I unscrewed the cap and tore a strip of fabric from the bottom of my shirt, stuffing it into the bottle to create a makeshift wick. Using another match, I lit the fabric, creating a crude Molotov cocktail. The creature sensed our plan and surged forward, its body elongating impossibly as it reached for us. I threw the flaming bottle directly at it. The bottle shattered against what might have been its chest, the whiskey igniting in a burst of blue flame. The creature shrieked, a sound so loud and terrible it made my ears ring, and thrashed wildly as the fire spread across its body. "Out!" Marcus shouted, grabbing Tessa's hand and pulling her toward the door. Daniela and I followed close behind. We burst out of the lookout station into the cool night air, the creature's screams pursuing us. Behind us, the fire spread quickly through the old wooden structure fueled by decades of dust and the strange symbols on the walls. We didn't stop to watch. We ran into the forest, away from the burning lookout, away from the terrible sounds of the creature's agony. The trail we'd followed earlier had vanished, or perhaps it had never really existed except to lead us to the trap. Instead, we pushed through the underbrush, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. "Which way?" Tessa gasped, her face streaked with tears and soot. None of us knew. In our panic, we'd lost all sense of direction. The forest was a maze of identical trees, and the overcast sky hid any stars that might have guided us. "Just keep moving," Daniela urged, "away from that thing." So we did, stumbling through the darkness, driven by pure animal fear. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the memory of those black eyes, that wrong face, kept me going. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we collapsed in exhaustion beneath a massive oak tree. The fire at the lookout station was visible only as a faint orange glow in the distance. The creature's screams had stopped, but that didn't necessarily mean it was dead. "Do you think we killed it?" Marcus asked, voicing the question we were all wondering. "I don't know," I admitted. "That journal. It suggested the entity has been here for decades, maybe longer. It possessed Howard's grandfather, then probably Howard himself. It might not be so easy to destroy." "What is it?" Tessa asked, hugging her knees to her chest. "Some kind of demon?" I thought about what Howard had said, about the Bennington monster, the Wendigo, about not putting names to things. "I think it's something ancient," I said finally. "Something that's been in these woods for centuries, feeding on fear and pain and death." "Well, I hope we burned it to a crisp," Daniela said grimly. We decided to rest for a short while, just long enough to catch our breath, before continuing our attempt to find a way out of the forest. None of us suggested trying to sleep. After what we'd seen, I doubted any of us would sleep normally again for a long time. As we sat in silence, catching our breath, I remembered the journal I'd taken from the lookout. I pulled it from my pack and opened it, shining my flashlight on the yellowed pages. "Is this really the time for reading?" Daniela asked, echoing Marcus's earlier sentiment. "There might be something in here that can help us," I explained. "Some clue about how to escape, or how to fight that thing if it comes back." I flipped through the pages, skimming Thomas Blackwood's increasingly disturbed entries. Most were rambling accounts of his encounters with the entity, how it would appear to him in different forms, sometimes as a lost hiker, sometimes as a wounded animal, sometimes as nothing more than a shadow at the corner of his vision. He wrote about the hunger that had begun to consume him, how he found himself thinking constantly about the hikers who occasionally passed by his lookout, imagining how they would taste. But toward the end, there was something useful, a crude map drawn in the same shaky hand as the rest of the journal. It showed the lookout station at its center and various landmarks in the surrounding area. The lake, labeled Hunger's Pool, an X marked cabin that must have been Howard's place, and crucially a dotted line leading from the lookout to what was labeled Old Logging Road. "Look," I said, showing the others. "If this map is accurate, there's a road about 2 miles east of the lookout. It might lead back to civilization." "How do we know which way is east?" Tessa asked. I checked my watch, a simple analog model with luminous hands. "It's just past midnight," I said. "If we can find a clearing where we can see the stars, I can figure out which way is east." It was a desperate plan, but it was all we had. We gathered what remained of our supplies and set off once more, searching for a break in the forest canopy. Eventually, we found a small clearing where a fallen tree had created a gap in the dense foliage above. The clouds had partially cleared, revealing a patch of star-studded sky. Using the rough astronomy knowledge I'd picked up during a college elective, I determined which direction was east, and we continued our journey with slightly more purpose. The forest seemed different now, less dense, the trees younger and more widely spaced. It gave me hope that we were leaving the ancient, haunted part of the woods behind. Then Marcus stopped abruptly, holding up a hand for silence. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. We all went still, straining our ears. At first, I heard nothing but the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then it came to me. A rhythmic sound, mechanical. An engine. "A car!" Daniela exclaimed. "It has to be the road." We hurried toward the sound, our exhaustion temporarily forgotten. The trees thinned further, and suddenly we were standing at the edge of a dirt road, narrow and overgrown, but definitely man-made. "Which way?" Tessa asked, looking up and down the empty road. The sound of the engine had faded. I consulted the journal's map again. According to Thomas Blackwood's drawings, the road eventually joined a larger highway to the south. "This way," I said, pointing. We walked along the dirt road, staying close together, still jumping at every sound from the forest around us. The road was uncomfortable underfoot, rutted and strewn with rocks, but it was undeniably a path to salvation, and we followed it eagerly. After about a mile, we began to see signs of civilization, an old, rusted gate marking some long-abandoned property, power lines running parallel to the road, and finally, gloriously, the reflective gleam of a stop sign at an intersection ahead. We had reached a paved road, a real road, with painted lines and guardrails. I could have wept with relief. "Now what?" Marcus asked. "We still don't know where we are, and I doubt there's much traffic at this hour." He was right. The road was deserted, stretching empty in both directions, and it was still the middle of the night. Our phones remained without service, but at least we were out of the forest, away from the thing that had nearly killed us. "We walk," Daniela decided. "One direction or the other, we'll eventually find a house or a gas station or something." We chose to go left, for no particular reason other than it seemed to be slightly downhill, and began our trek along the empty road. The night was cold now, and none of us was dressed for extended hiking. We huddled close together for warmth as we walked. After about half an hour, we spotted lights in the distance, the welcome glow of artificial illumination. As we drew closer, we could make out a small cluster of buildings, a gas station, a diner, and what looked like a motel. A sign over the diner proclaimed it to be Earl's Place, and beneath that, in smaller letters, Woodford, Vermont. The name meant nothing to me, but the sight of those buildings, that little outpost of humanity in the wilderness, was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The gas station was closed, but lights still burned in the diner. We practically ran the last 100 yards, bursting through the door like survivors of a shipwreck reaching shore. There were only 3 people inside: an elderly man behind the counter, a middle-aged waitress wiping down tables, and a trucker type nursing a cup of coffee in a booth by the window. All 3 looked up in surprise as we stumbled in, dirty, disheveled, and wild-eyed. "Good Lord, what happened to you folks?" the waitress exclaimed, dropping her cloth. The story came pouring out of us then. Not the full truth, which would have sounded like the ravings of lunatics, but a sanitized version about getting lost while hiking, spending a terrifying night in the woods, and finally finding our way to the road. The waitress, whose name tag identified her as Darlene, clucked sympathetically and ushered us to a booth, bringing us coffee and offering to call the sheriff. "You're the 3rd group this month," the old man behind the counter commented, eyeing us over the rim of his own coffee mug. "People got no business hiking around Glastonbury. Place ain't right." "What do you mean?" "The 3rd group?" Daniela asked sharply. The old man, Earl himself as it turned out, shrugged. "Had some college kids come through here a couple weeks back, same as you. Lost their friend up there. Sheriff's still looking for him. And before that, a family of 4. Only 3 came back. The mother's still in the hospital over in Bennington." A chill ran through me, despite the warmth of the diner. "What happened to her?" Earl shook his head. "Don't rightly know. She ain't talking. Burns, they said, and some kind of infection." He said the last word as if it were a euphemism for something worse. We fell silent, sipping our coffee, avoiding each other's eyes. We'd escaped with our lives, but the implications of Earl's words were clear. We weren't the first, and we wouldn't be the last. Whatever lurked in the forests around Glastonbury Mountain was ancient and patient. It would continue to feed, continue to lure victims into its domain. The sheriff arrived about 20 minutes later, a tall, weathered man named Hanson who looked too tired for this late-night call. He took our statements with professional detachment, not commenting on the fact that our story had obvious holes, or that we kept glancing nervously at the windows as if expecting to see a face pressed against the glass, watching us. "We'll send someone to check out the fire at the lookout station," he said, closing his notebook. "Where were you folks parked? I can give you a ride back to your car." The question triggered a fresh wave of panic. Our car was at the original trailhead, miles from where we'd emerged from the forest. We had no idea how to get back there, and I, for one, had no desire to go anywhere near those woods again. Fortunately, Sheriff Hanson knew the area well. When we described approximately where we'd left our car, he nodded in recognition. "That's the Glastonbury trailhead, off Route 9, about 20 miles from here. I can take you there now, if you want." We accepted gratefully, piling into his patrol car for the ride back to our vehicle. As we drove through the night, I stared out the window at the dark forests passing by, half expecting to see glowing eyes staring back, or 2 tall, wrong-limbed silhouettes standing among the trees. The sheriff made small talk as he drove, probably trying to put us at ease. "You folks aren't from around here, I take it?" "Boston," Marcus replied. "We just came up for the weekend." Hanson nodded. "Well, no offense, but next time, maybe try New Hampshire. Safer hiking there." "Have there been a lot of incidents in these woods?" I asked, unable to help myself. The sheriff was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "More than I'd like," he said finally. "Glastonbury's got a history. Indigenous folks wouldn't go near it. Then there were the disappearances in the 40s and 50s, the Bennington Triangle, some writers called it. People going missing without a trace." "And it's still happening," Daniela observed. Sheriff Hanson's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I've been sheriff here for 22 years, he said. "In that time, I've had 17 hikers go missing in those woods. Only 6 bodies ever found. The rest," he shook his head, "just gone. Like the forest swallowed them up." "Or something in the forest," Tessa murmured. The sheriff glanced at her in the rearview mirror but didn't comment further. When we finally reached our car, still parked at the trailhead where our journey had begun, it felt like we'd come full circle. It was hard to believe that only 36 hours had passed since we'd arrived, excited and oblivious to the horror that awaited us in the wilderness. Sheriff Hansen waited until we'd checked that the car would start, then gave us directions to the nearest hospital in Bennington, suggesting we get checked out just to be safe. We thanked him for his help. As he was about to leave, I found myself calling out to him. "Sheriff, that cabin by the lake, Howard Blackwood's place, you might want to check it out. I think there might be evidence there about the missing hikers." He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Blackwood Cabin's been abandoned for years," he said finally. "Howard Blackwood disappeared back in '97. But I'll look into it." With that, he returned to his patrol car and drove away, leaving us alone in the quiet, pre-dawn darkness of the trailhead parking lot. We didn't speak much during the drive back to Boston. What was there to say? We'd encountered something that defied rational explanation, something ancient and malevolent that preyed on human fear and flesh. We'd barely escaped with our lives, and we carried wounds that would never fully heal. Not the physical kind, but the sort that wake you in the night, sweat-soaked and screaming. I still have Thomas Blackwood's journal. Sometimes, in my weaker moments, I open it and reread his descent into madness, searching for clues about the entity we encountered. I've researched the local folklore, the indigenous legends, the documented disappearances in the area. I've found patterns, connections, but no definitive answers. Tessa and Marcus broke up 3 months after our trip. The experience had changed them both, but in different, incompatible ways. Marcus became obsessed with proving what we'd seen was real, spending hours online researching similar phenomena. Tessa went the opposite direction, throwing herself into logical pursuits, refusing to discuss what happened or acknowledge that it was anything but a shared delusion brought on by fear and exhaustion. Daniela and I still talk about it sometimes. She's the only one who understands, who saw what I saw, felt what I felt. She's moved to California now, as far from New England forests as she could get. She never goes hiking anymore. As for me, I stay in Boston, surrounded by concrete and glass and the comforting noise of traffic. I don't venture into the wilderness. I avoid the woods, especially at night. I've turned down promotions that would require travel to Vermont or New Hampshire. Some might call it trauma or phobia, but I know it's just good sense. There are things in this world that we aren't meant to understand, predators that have been hunting us since before we built our first cities. I know because I've seen one. I've heard its voice, looked into its eyes. I've felt its hunger. And sometimes in my dreams, I'm back in those dark woods on Glastonbury Mountain. But in the dreams, I don't escape. In the dreams, it catches me, and I finally learn what it's like to be consumed from the inside out, to have my skin worn like a suit by something ancient and endlessly hungry. I wake from these nightmares gasping, drenched in sweat, my throat raw from screaming, and in those moments I'm never quite sure if I really did escape, or if the life I'm living now is just the entity's final, cruel trick, allowing me to believe I'm free before it reveals the truth. Because the worst part, the thing I've never told anyone, not even Daniela, is what I saw in the rearview mirror as we drove away from the trailhead that morning. Just for an instant, Sheriff Hansen's face changed. His features shifted, his eyes darkened to bottomless pits, and he smiled at me with a mouth that stretched too wide across his face. By the time I turned to look directly at him, he was normal again. Just a tired small-town sheriff seeing off some traumatized hikers. But I knew what I'd seen. It's out there still, waiting in the dark hollows of Glastonbury Mountain. And sometimes, I think it followed us home. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the summer of 2024, during what was supposed to be a restorative hiking trip in the Green Mountains of Vermont. I'd been struggling with claustrophobia since a cave diving accident in college left me trapped underwater for nearly 3 minutes. The therapist suggested exposure therapy, not to caves but to other enclosed spaces that felt safer. The dense forests of Vermont were her recommendation. Surrounded, but not trapped, she'd said, a way to recalibrate your fear response. What I didn't tell her was that I'd been having the dreams. The same one, repeatedly. I'm walking through a forest at dusk, and the trees begin to close in, their branches reaching out like hands, and there's something behind me. Something that breathes with a wet, clicking sound. I never see it because I always wake up right when its fingers touch my shoulder. I chose the Glastonbury Wilderness in southern Vermont partly because of the therapist's suggestion, but also because of its reputation. The area sits within what locals call the Bennington Triangle, a region with a history of mysterious disappearances dating back to the 1940s. 5 people vanished there between 1945 and 1950, and numerous hikers have gone missing since. The official explanation is always the same. People get lost in the wilderness. It happens. But I was drawn to that darkness. Maybe confronting legends about a cursed forest would help me face my own demons. Besides, I've always found comfort in preparing for the worst-case scenario. It gives me a sense of control. I rented a small cabin on the outskirts of the now-abandoned logging town of Glastonbury, which sits at the base of Glastonbury Mountain. The settlement had been deserted since the early 1900s, but a few old structures remained, including a handful of renovated cabins available for tourists seeking solitude. The nearest inhabited town, Woodford, was only 13 miles away. Close enough for emergencies, far enough to feel properly isolated. The cabin itself was rustic but clean. A single room with a wood stove, a small kitchenette, a bathroom with running water, thankfully, and a queen-sized bed with a handmade quilt. The walls were lined with bookshelves containing local history and guides to the area's flora and fauna. A framed map of the Glastonbury Wilderness hung above the desk. After settling in, I spoke with the property caretaker, an elderly man named Walter Farnsworth, who lived in a larger cabin about a quarter-mile down the dirt road. He was tall and wiry with weathered skin that reminded me of old leather. His eyes were sharp and blue beneath bushy white eyebrows. "You hiking up to the fire tower?" he asked, studying me as if assessing whether I was up to the task. "That's the plan. I've read it's about a 6-mile hike from here. The long trail to Glastonbury Mountain. Beautiful views. Just stick to the marked paths." His expression darkened slightly. The woods can play tricks on a person's sense of direction. "I've got a compass and GPS on my phone," I assured him. Walter chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Technology has a funny way of failing up there. Maybe take a paper map as backup." "Do you believe in the Bennington Triangle stories?" I asked. Walter was quiet for a long moment. "I believe people go missing when they don't respect the wilderness. But I also believe these mountains are older than anything we can understand." He handed me a walkie-talkie. "Cell service is spotty. If you need anything, I'm on Channel 3. Check in each evening, would you? Just so I know not to send out search parties." That night, I sat on the cabin's small porch, listening to the symphony of cicadas and frogs, watching fireflies rise from the meadow that separated the cabin from the encroaching forest. The air was thick with the scent of pine and loamy earth. Despite the peaceful setting, I felt uneasy, as if I were being watched. I kept glancing toward the tree line, where shadows seemed to shift and separate from the darkness. I slept poorly, the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness keeping me on edge. The dream came again. The forest, the reaching branches, the wet breathing behind me. But this time, when I woke gasping, the darkness of the cabin felt just as threatening as the darkness in my dreams. The next morning dawned clear and bright. I packed my day bag with water, protein bars, a first aid kit, my phone, the paper map Walter had provided, and a compass. I dressed in layers despite the summer heat. Mountain weather could be unpredictable. The trailhead was just beyond the meadow, marked by a weathered wooden sign. "Long trail, Glastonbury Mountain, 5.8 miles. The white blazes painted on trees would guide me along the way. The first hour of hiking was peaceful, almost meditative. The trail climbed gradually through mixed hardwood forest, sunlight filtering through the canopy to create dappled patterns on the forest floor. Chickadees called from the branches, and occasionally a red squirrel would dart across the path. My claustrophobia remained dormant despite the closeness of the trees. I felt open, free. That changed when I reached a particularly dense section of forest about 2 miles in. The trees here were predominantly spruce, growing so closely together that their branches interlaced overhead, blocking much of the sky. The air felt cooler, damper. Moss covered everything: trees, rocks, even parts of the trail, in thick green carpets. My chest tightened as the familiar feeling of confinement began to creep in. I stopped, closing my eyes and practicing the breathing exercises my therapist had taught me. 4 counts in. Hold for 7, 8 counts out. Repeat. When I opened my eyes, I noticed something odd. About 20 feet off the trail stood a crude structure, something like a shelter made of sticks and branches leaned against a large boulder. Curious, I left the path to investigate. The shelter was more elaborate than it had appeared from a distance. The branches were woven together with what looked like sinew or thin strips of hide. Inside, the ground was covered with dried pine needles formed into something resembling a nest. Strange symbols had been carved into both the boulder and some of the larger branches: spirals, triangles with eyes in their centers, and what might have been stick figures with elongated limbs. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I was intruding on something private, something that didn't belong in a national forest. I backed away, intent on returning to the trail, but when I turned around, I couldn't immediately spot the white blazes that marked the path. I'd only walked a short distance. The trail should have been clearly visible. Panic fluttered in my chest. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but as Walter had warned, there was no signal. The compass, at least, still worked. I knew the trail ran roughly north to south, so I headed east, pushing through the dense underbrush. After about 5 minutes of increasingly desperate searching, I emerged back onto the trail, relief flooding through me. But something felt wrong. The quality of light had changed, becoming dimmer, though my watch showed it was only 11:30 a.m. The air felt heavier too, as if a storm were brewing. I continued hiking, pushing the strange shelter from my mind. The trail grew steeper, more challenging, which helped distract me from my unease. By early afternoon, I reached a small clearing with a view of the surrounding mountains. I sat on a fallen log to eat lunch and check my location on the paper map. According to the map, I was about halfway to the fire tower. I could continue on or turn back. Despite my earlier fright, I decided to press forward. The clearing had eased my claustrophobia, and I was determined to reach my goal. As I packed away my lunch debris, I noticed movement at the edge of the clearing. A deer, I thought at first, but the shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin. I squinted, trying to make out details, but whatever it was had already withdrawn into the trees. "Hello," I called, wondering if it might be another hiker. No response came except for the soft whisper of wind through leaves. I returned to the trail, climbing steadily higher. The forest changed again, transitioning to stunted spruce and fir trees twisted by constant exposure to harsh mountain weather. Their gnarled forms reminded me of arthritic hands reaching from the ground. The sky darkened further, and I heard the low rumble of thunder in the distance. I checked my watch, 3:15 p.m. I still had at least 2 hours of hiking ahead of me, and the prospect of being caught in a thunderstorm on an exposed mountaintop was concerning. Reluctantly, I decided to turn back. I'd gone perhaps a quarter mile down the trail when fat drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, it was a deluge. I stopped to pull a rain jacket from my pack and continued downward, careful of my footing on the suddenly slick trail. The rain intensified, accompanied by lightning that seemed to strike increasingly close. The trail quickly became a muddy stream. water ran into my eyes, making it difficult to see the path ahead. Then came a lightning strike so close that the accompanying thunder was almost simultaneous, a deafening crack that I felt in my bones. Terrified, I broke into a run, slipping and sliding down the trail. In my panic, I missed a switchback and found myself careening down a steep slope off the trail. I tried to stop, grabbing at branches and undergrowth, but the ground was too slippery. I fell, tumbling through brush and over rocks until my head struck something hard, and the world went dark. I woke to silence. The rain had stopped. I lay on my back looking up at a canopy of dripping leaves. Pain throbbed at my temple, and when I touched the spot, my fingers came away bloody. I sat up slowly, assessing the damage. Nothing seemed broken, though I was bruised and scraped in numerous places. But something was wrong. The light had changed again. Not the dim gray of the storm, but a deep, golden hue that suggested late afternoon or early evening. I checked my watch, 7:43 p.m. I'd been unconscious for hours. Panic seized me. I was lost in the Glastonbury wilderness with night approaching. I needed to find my way back to the trail, but looking around, I had no idea which direction to climb. I pulled out my compass, which thankfully had survived the fall. The trail had been running north-south, so I needed to head either east or west to intersect it. I chose east and began to climb, using tree trunks and roots to pull myself up the slippery slope. The going was slow and painful. My head throbbed with each movement, and I worried about concussion. Just as the slope began to level out, I heard something that made me freeze. A voice, soft, distant, barely audible over the dripping of water from leaves. Emily. I whirled around, nearly losing my footing. Hello? Is someone there? Only the forest answered with its twilight symphony of insects and frogs. I must have imagined it, I told myself. A trick of the wind, or my injured brain playing cruel games. I continued upward until I reached level ground, but instead of finding the trail, I discovered another clearing, smaller than the one where I'd eaten lunch. At its center stood a circle of stones. They were arranged too precisely to be natural, each about the size of a human head, spaced equidistantly in a perfect circle about 10 feet in diameter. In the center of the stone circle lay a single object, a small, crude doll made of twisted branches and what looked like human hair. My hair, I realized with dawning horror, long and dark brown, just like mine. What the fuck? I whispered, backing away. My heel caught on something and I nearly fell. Looking down, I saw another stone circle, this one partially hidden by undergrowth, with another doll at its center. Beyond that, another circle and another. Dozens of them, stretching into the darkening forest. Emily. The voice came again, closer now. It had a strange, hollow quality, as if spoken from the bottom of a well. I ran. I didn't care which direction. I just needed to get away from those circles, from that voice that knew my name. Branches whipped at my face and arms. Roots seemed to rise up to trip me. The forest grew darker by the second as twilight deepened toward night. I ran until my lungs burned, until the stitch in my side became unbearable. Finally, gasping for breath, I stopped and leaned against a massive oak tree. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of the absolute silence surrounding me. No insects, no frogs, no rustling leaves, though I could feel a breeze on my skin. Then came the wet, clicking sound of something breathing. My dream. This was my dream made real. Slowly, I turned around. In the deepening gloom stood a figure. It was roughly human-shaped but wrong in fundamental ways. Too tall, at least 7 feet. Too thin, its limbs like saplings. Its skin, if it could be called that, was mottled gray-green, the texture of old tree bark. It had no discernible face, just a suggestion of features. Depressions where eyes should be, a vertical slit for a mouth. Emily Hall, it said in that hollow voice, "You came to us." I couldn't move. terror had frozen me in place. "What are you?" I managed to whisper. The creature tilted its head, the movement unnaturally fluid. "The locals call me the Glastonbury Stalker. Others have named me Wendigo or Forest Demon." The slit that served as its mouth widened slightly. "Names have power, but not over me. I am older than names." "What do you want?" "To show you something. Something you seek without knowing." It extended a limb toward me. Not an arm, but something more like a branch, its end splitting into twig-like fingers. "Your fear, the source of it." I flinched away from its touch. "Stay back. You entered my domain willingly, Emily Hall. You sought the darkness." It took a step closer, moving with an unsettling grace. "The shelter you found was mine. You touched what was not yours to touch." My mind raced, seeking some way out. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I'll leave and never come back." The creature made a sound that might have been laughter, a dry rustling like dead leaves blown across pavement. Others have made such promises. The hiker, Mitty Rivers, in 1945, the college student, Paula Weldon, in 1946, James Tedford, Francis Chrisman, Frida Langer, all of them wandered where they shouldn't. All of them mine now. The Bennington Triangle disappearances. This thing, this creature, was claiming responsibility. "Let me go," I pleaded. "Please." "I will show you first, then you may choose." Before I could react, it moved with blinding speed, wrapping those branch-like limbs around me. I screamed, but the sound was cut short as the world dissolved around us. Images flashed through my mind. Not memories, but something older, deeper. I saw the mountain as it had been thousands of years ago, watched as indigenous people made offerings at stone circles like the ones I'd found. I saw European settlers cutting down the ancient trees, building the logging town that would become Glastonbury. I saw the forests reclaiming the land when the people left, but something dark remained, something that had always been there, feeding on fear. Then the visions changed, becoming more personal. I was back in that cave, water flooding in around me, the panic as my air ran out. But now I saw what I hadn't before. Something moving in the dark water. Something that had been watching me. That had let me live because it had marked me. "You have carried my touch since that day," the creature whispered directly into my mind. "Your fear has been a beacon calling you here." With a gasp, I found myself released. I collapsed to the forest floor, shaking uncontrollably. The creature loomed over me. "Now choose, stay and serve, or attempt to flee." I didn't hesitate. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly into the darkness. Behind me, that terrible laughter rose again. "Run, Emily Hall. Your fear feeds me either way." I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I had no direction, no plan beyond escape. My headlamp bounced wildly, the beam cutting erratic patterns through the trees. Shadows seemed to move independently of the light, reaching for me with grasping fingers. Time lost meaning. I might have been running for minutes or hours. Eventually, my foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard. The breath knocked from my lungs. I lay there, gasping, waiting for the creature to find me. Instead, I heard a familiar sound. Water running over rocks. A stream. And where there was a stream, there might be a trail. I forced myself to my feet and followed the sound. The stream was small but fast-moving, tumbling down the mountainside. I remembered from the map that several streams fed into larger waterways that eventually reached inhabited areas. If I followed it downhill, I might find my way out. As I picked my way along the stream bank, the forest began to thin. The dark, oppressive feeling lifted slightly. Had I escaped the creature's territory? I didn't dare hope. Then I saw light through the trees ahead. Not sunlight, but artificial light. A building. I emerged from the forest onto a dirt road. Across it stood a cabin with a porch light illuminating the area. With a shock of recognition, I realized it was Walter's cabin. I ran to the door and pounded on it with what little strength I had left. "Walter! Walter, please help!" The door swung open to reveal the old caretaker, a shotgun in his hands. When he saw me, he lowered the weapon. "Good Lord, girl! What happened to you?" I collapsed onto his porch, sobbing with relief and lingering fear. Walter helped me inside and sat me in a chair by the wood stove. He brought a blanket, wrapped it around my shoulders, and pressed a mug of hot tea into my trembling hands. "Take it easy now. You're safe." When I could speak, I told him what had happened. The fall, being knocked unconscious, waking to find myself lost. I hesitated before continuing, afraid he would think I was crazy or concussed, but something in his watchful eyes told me he might understand. "I saw something in the forest," I said finally. "Something not human." Walter was silent for a long moment. Then, "The stalker found you." My blood ran cold. "You know about it?" He nodded gravely. "My family's been caretakers here for generations. We're the watchers, you might say. We keep an eye on who goes into those woods and who comes out. Why didn't you warn me? Would you have believed me? Or would you have gone anyway, thinking it was just a local superstition?" He sighed heavily. "Besides, it doesn't reveal itself to everyone. It chooses. It said I've carried its touch since a diving accident years ago, that my fear was a beacon." Walter nodded as if this made perfect sense. It feeds on fear. But more than that, it collects those with a particular quality to their fear. A depth, a purity. It's drawn to them like a moth to flame. Those missing hikers, it took them. Some of them. Others simply got lost in the woods and died of exposure. The stalker doesn't need to hunt. The wilderness does most of the work for it. He studied me with those penetrating blue eyes. "You're lucky. It rarely lets anyone go once it's shown itself." I shuddered, remembering its words. "Stay and serve, or attempt to flee." "What is it?" I asked. "Something old, something that was here long before humans arrived and will be here long after we're gone." The Abenaki people knew about it. They left offerings to appease it. The settlers who built Glastonbury felt its influence but didn't understand it. They abandoned the town when too many strange things happened. Too many people disappeared. "Why are you still here?" Walter's expression hardened. "Someone has to be. Someone has to know the truth, to keep watch. And sometimes, to help those who escape." He paused. "You're not the first to come to my door in the middle of the night, half mad with fear." That night, I slept in Walter's spare room, the shotgun leaning against the wall beside the bed at his insistence. I didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion overcame terror, and I fell into a deep, dreamless void. I woke to sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, I thought I was back in my own cabin, and that everything had been a nightmare. Then the pain in my body reminded me otherwise. Walter drove me to the hospital in Bennington, where they treated the cut on my head and my various scrapes and bruises. The doctor diagnosed a mild concussion and advised rest. We told them I'd fallen while hiking, a simple accident. As Walter drove me back to my cabin to collect my things, I asked the question that had been bothering me since the previous night. Why didn't it take me? Why let me escape? Walter kept his eyes on the winding road. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it's still with you. I felt cold despite the summer heat. What do you mean? The stalker marks those it finds interesting. Sometimes it takes them immediately. Sometimes it lets them go, knowing they'll carry its touch with them wherever they go. He glanced at me briefly. It's patient. It has all the time in the world. When we reached my cabin, I hesitated before going inside. I can't stay here. No, Walter agreed. You should go home. But know this, distance may not matter. If it's marked you, truly marked you, it can find you anywhere. How do I protect myself? Keep iron near you. The old folklore has some truth to it. And salt. But mostly, work on your fear. The less you feed it, the less power it has over you. I packed my belongings with shaking hands while Walter waited outside. As I was about to leave, I noticed something on the bed that hadn't been there before. A small doll made of twisted branches and dark brown hair. My hair. I ran from the cabin, leaving the doll behind. That was 3 months ago. I'd been seeing a new therapist, one who specializes in trauma. I haven't told her the whole truth, just that I got lost in the woods and had a frightening experience. She thinks my continued anxiety stems from the concussion and the shock of the accident. I followed Walter's advice. There's iron under my mattress, salt across my windowsills and doorways. I've been working on my claustrophobia through guided exposure therapy. But sometimes, usually in the darkest hours of the night, I hear a familiar sound, that wet, clicking breathing. And I know it's just outside my door, waiting, watching, feeding on the fear that spikes through me at the sound. The dreams have changed. I'm still walking through a forest, but now I recognize it as the Glastonbury Wilderness. The trees still reach for me with branch-like fingers, but now I see them for what they are, extensions of the stalker itself. And when it touches my shoulder, I no longer wake up. Instead, I turn around. I look into those hollow depressions where eyes should be, and I hear its voice, that hollow sound like wind through empty spaces. Soon, Emily Hall, when your fear is ripe, when it has matured into something truly exquisite, then I will come for you. I don't know if I can escape it. I don't know if anyone truly can, but I keep iron close and salt closer. I work on mastering my fear rather than letting it master me. And I warn anyone who will listen. Stay away from the Glastonbury Wilderness. Stick to the marked trails if you must go. And if you find a shelter made of branches or a circle of stones with a doll at its center, run. Run, and don't look back. Because the stalker is watching. Always watching. And once it knows your name, once it tastes your fear, it never truly lets you go. My name is Jessica Davis, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the summer of 2024, during what should have been a peaceful hiking trip through Camel's Hump State Park in Vermont. I needed to escape. My therapist had been pushing me to reconnect with nature after my divorce, insisting it would help process the grief I'd been carrying since losing both my marriage and my mother within 6 months of each other. So when my best friend Olivia suggested we take a week-long hiking trip through the Green Mountains, I reluctantly agreed. Liv was the outdoorsy type, athletic, confident, and seemingly fearless. Everything I wasn't. But she'd been my rock during the divorce, and I couldn't say no to her enthusiasm about showing me her favorite hiking trails. Besides, I had nothing else to distract me from my empty apartment and the deafening silence that had become my constant companion. "You're going to love it, Jess," she'd promised, her eyes bright with excitement as we drove through the winding roads leading to the trailhead parking lot. "The views from Camel's Hump are absolutely worth every blister." I forced a smile, focusing on the lush greenery rushing past my window. We had planned a 5-day trek, looping through some of the less traveled paths of the park. Liv had hiked parts of it before but wanted to explore some of the more remote eastern trails. "Did you know this area has some pretty wild folklore?" Liv asked, turning down the radio. The Abenaki people called this mountain Tawapodiwajo, Sitting Mountain. They believed it was the resting place of a giant being who died and turned to stone. "That's comforting," I replied dryly. "Oh, there's more. Some old Vermont stories talk about people going missing up here, hikers hearing voices calling them off the trails." She wiggled her eyebrows dramatically. "Are you trying to terrify me before we even start?" She laughed. "No, I'm trying to add some mystique to our adventure. Relax, Jess. The only real danger out here is poison ivy and maybe a twisted ankle." How terribly wrong she was. The first day went well enough. We hiked about 8 miles along the Monroe Trail, the main path up Camel's Hump. The weather was perfect, sunny but cool with a light breeze that kept the bugs at bay. Liv pointed out various plants and birds, her knowledge impressive. I felt myself relaxing for the first time in months, the rhythmic motion of hiking and the clean air filling my lungs with something close to peace. We set up our first camp near Montclair Glen Lodge, a rustic shelter along the long trail. A few other hikers were there, but they kept to themselves. As darkness fell, we cooked freeze-dried pasta on our portable stove and talked about nothing important, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "See? Not so bad, right?" Liv nudged my shoulder. "I admit, this is nice," I said, surprised to find I meant it. The weight that had been crushing my chest for months seemed lighter somehow. We turned in early, exhausted from the day's exertion. I fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the gentle rustle of wind through the trees and Liv's soft breathing from her sleeping bag a few feet away. I woke suddenly in the darkest part of night. At first, I couldn't identify what had disturbed me. The forest was eerily silent. No insects chirping, no rustling leaves, just a heavy, waiting stillness that pressed against my eardrums. Then I heard it. A voice, distant but clear, calling my name. Jessica. I sat up, heart pounding. It sounded like it was coming from just beyond our campsite, a woman's voice, soft and beckoning. "Jessica, come here." "Liv," I whispered, reaching out to shake her sleeping form. "Liv, wake up." She stirred, grumbling. "What? What time is it?" "Shh. Listen." We both held our breath, straining to hear in the darkness. "Jessica, I need help." Liv sat up now, fully alert. "Who the hell is that?" "I don't know," I whispered. "It sounds like it's coming from the trees." The voice called again, more urgent this time. "Jessica, please." "We should check if someone needs help," Liv said, already reaching for her headlamp. Every instinct in my body screamed against it, but I couldn't articulate why. "Maybe we should wait until morning, or call for park rangers." "What if someone's hurt? We can't just ignore it." Liv was already pulling on her boots. That was Liv, always rushing to help, consequences be damned. I reluctantly followed her example, heart hammering as we stepped out of our tent. The night air was unexpectedly cold for July, a biting chill that cut through my fleece jacket. Our headlamps carved weak cones of light into the thick darkness, barely illuminating the trees closest to us. "Hello?" Liv called out. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" Silence answered her. The voice had stopped. I moved closer to Liv, fighting the urge to grab her arm like a frightened child. "See? Nothing," I said, relief flooding through me. "Let's go back to Jessica." The voice came again, much closer now, directly behind us. We spun around simultaneously. Our headlamp beams caught nothing but trees and underbrush. "This isn't funny," Liv called out, her voice steady but with an edge I rarely heard. "If you need help, show yourself." Another long silence followed, stretching my nerves to breaking point. Then a rustling from our left, deliberate and slow. "There," Liv whispered, directing her light toward the sound. Something moved between the trees, just beyond the reach of our lights. A figure, hunched and indistinct. It paused, as if watching us, then retreated deeper into the forest. "Wait," Liv called, starting forward. I grabbed her arm. "Are you insane? We're not following some random person into the woods in the middle of the night." She hesitated, torn between her natural inclination to help and the obvious danger. Before she could decide, another sound froze us both in place. A low, guttural growl that was distinctly inhuman. That settled it. We hurried back to our tent, zipped ourselves in, and spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening to occasional rustling movements circling our campsite. Neither of us mentioned the voice that had so clearly spoken my name. Morning came with merciful normalcy. Birdsong, dappled sunlight through the trees, and the smell of pine. We could almost convince ourselves that the night's events had been a shared nightmare. if not for the tracks we found around our campsite. "Those aren't human," Liv said quietly, kneeling beside one of the clearer impressions in the soft earth. It was large, with what looked like claw marks at the end of elongated toes. "And they're not from any animal I recognize." "Maybe a bear," I suggested, knowing it wasn't. Liv just looked at me, her expression saying what we both knew. Bears don't call people by name in a woman's voice. "Let's pack up," she said finally. "We can head back to the main trail, maybe cut the trip short." "No," I surprised myself by saying. "No, we came out here to hike, so let's stick to the plan." Part of me wondered if I'd lost my mind, but a stronger part refused to let fear send me running back to my empty apartment. Whatever was out here, it couldn't be worse than the crushing emptiness waiting for me back home. Liv studied my face. "You sure?" "I'm sure. We'll just maybe avoid camping in this particular spot again." She nodded slowly. "All right, but we stick together. No wandering off alone, even for bathroom breaks." "Deal." We packed quickly and set off toward the eastern trails, the less traveled routes Liv had been so excited about. I felt eyes on us as we hiked away from the campsite, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there but silent trees. The second day's hike took us deeper into the forest, along trails that grew progressively narrower and less defined. We had to check our map and GPS frequently, which did nothing to calm my growing anxiety. "Have you noticed how quiet it is?" I asked Liv around midday as we paused to refill our water bottles at a small stream. She nodded, face grim. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. The forest around us felt empty, abandoned. Even the insects seemed scarce. We hadn't passed another hiker all day. "Maybe we should turn back," I suggested, no longer caring if it made me seem cowardly. "Let's just make it to the next shelter," Liv said. "It should be about 4 miles ahead. We can decide there." I agreed reluctantly, and we continued our hike in tense silence. The trail led us up steeper terrain, winding through increasingly dense forest. The trees here were older, massive trunks covered in thick moss, branches twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate, like reaching hands. My phone had lost signal hours ago, and even our GPS device was acting strangely, sometimes showing us moving in the opposite direction than we were actually traveling. Liv relied more and more on her compass and paper map, her forehead creased with concern. "We should have reached the shelter by now," she admitted finally as the afternoon light began to fade. "Either we're off course, or what?" She shook her head. "Nothing. Let's set up camp here. It's getting too dark to keep going." We found a small clearing to pitch our tent. As Liv worked on getting a fire started, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The trees seemed to lean inward, creating a circle around us that felt more like a trap than a shelter. "Liv," I said quietly, "does anything seem off to you?" She looked up from her work with the kindling, her expression carefully neutral. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. It's just, I feel like we're being herded." "Herded?" She raised an eyebrow. "By what?" I gestured helplessly at the surrounding forest. "By this. The trail disappearing, the GPS glitching, even these trees. Don't they seem to be closing in around us?" Liv stood up slowly, glancing around the clearing. For a moment, I thought she was going to dismiss my concerns. Instead, she said, "I didn't want to freak you out more, but yeah, something's wrong. This isn't the same forest I hiked last year." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling air. "What do you mean?" "These trees, they're too old. The whole forest feels different, and I can't find any landmarks that match my map." She hesitated. "It's like we've somehow wandered into a different place entirely." Before I could respond, the fire Liv had been building suddenly roared to life, flames leaping far higher than they should have from the small pile of kindling. But instead of the warm orange-yellow of normal fire, these flames burned a sickly blue-green. We both jumped back. "What the hell?" Liv gasped. The unnatural fire cast shifting shadows through the clearing, making the trees appear to move, to breathe. And in those shadows, I thought I saw figures, tall, thin shapes sliding between the trunks, watching us with eyes that reflected the eerie light. "We need to leave," I whispered. "Now." Liv didn't argue. We hastily grabbed our essentials, leaving the tent behind, and stumbled back to what we hoped was the trail, the strange fire still burning bright behind us. We half ran through the darkening forest, our headlamps bouncing wildly across the trees. I kept glancing back, certain I could hear footsteps pursuing us, branches cracking in our wake. "There!" Liv suddenly exclaimed, pointing ahead. "I see light!" Through the trees, I could make out the warm glow of what appeared to be a cabin. Without discussion, we made straight for it, pushing through underbrush and scrambling over fallen logs. The cabin materialized out of the gloom, a solid, rustic structure with smoke curling from its chimney. A porch light cast a yellow pool around the front door. It looked so normal, so safe, that I nearly sobbed with relief. Liv reached the door first and knocked frantically. "Hello? Is anyone there? We need help." The door opened almost immediately, revealing an elderly man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "Goodness," he said, taking in our disheveled appearance. "You two look like you've seen a ghost. Come in quickly." We didn't need to be told twice, rushing inside as he stepped back. The cabin's interior was warm and cozy. A fire burning in a stone hearth, mismatched furniture arranged comfortably around it, shelves lined with books and curious objects I couldn't immediately identify. "I'm Herbert Blackwood," the man said, closing and, I noted with unease, locking the door behind us. "Most folks just call me Old Herb. What brings two young ladies out to my neck of the woods after dark?" Liv and I exchanged glances. How much should we tell him? "We're hikers," Liv began cautiously. "We got lost. The trails seemed to have disappeared, and our GPS wasn't working right." Herb nodded as if this was a common occurrence. "Happens more than you'd think around these parts. The forest has a way of rearranging itself sometimes, especially for those it takes an interest in." He gave me a peculiar look as he said this. "What do you mean, takes an interest in?" I asked. He didn't answer directly, instead gesturing toward his small kitchen area. "You must be hungry. I've got stew on the stove. Why don't you warm yourselves by the fire while I fix you a bowl?" We were hungry, and the stew smelled delicious. Despite my lingering unease, I felt myself beginning to relax in the cabin's warm atmosphere. Liv and I settled onto a threadbare but comfortable sofa near the fire. On the wall above the mantel hung various animal skulls and dried herbs in bunches. Less decorative and more protective, somehow. "This place is weird," Liv whispered to me. "But at least we're safe for the night." I wasn't so sure about that, but I was too exhausted to argue. Herb returned with 2 steaming bowls and handed them to us. "Eat up. You'll need your strength." Again, that strange look directed at me. The stew was rich and flavorful, with chunks of meat I couldn't quite identify. "This is delicious," Liv said between bites. "What kind of meat is this?" "Just game from the forest," Herb replied vaguely, settling into a rocking chair across from us. "Now why don't you tell me what really happened out there? What sent you running through the dark like the devil himself was on your heels?" Liv began recounting our experiences, the voice calling my name, the strange tracks, the unnatural fire. As she spoke, Herb's expression grew increasingly grave. "And it was just your name it called?" he asked me when Liv finished. "Not hers?" I nodded slowly. He sighed, running a gnarled hand through his thin white hair. "Has anyone close to you passed recently? Someone whose voice you might recognize?" The question hit me like a physical blow. My mother, 6 months ago." Herb nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "And I'd wager you're carrying a heavy grief, the kind that leaves a hole in your soul." I couldn't speak, throat suddenly tight. Liv answered for me. "She lost her mother and went through a divorce, all within a few months." "I see." Herb rose stiffly from his chair and went to one of his shelves, retrieving a leather-bound book. What you encountered out there is known locally as the Whispering Hag. Old as the mountains themselves, she is. Feeds on grief and loneliness. He opened the book, revealing handwritten pages and crude illustrations. She calls to those who are vulnerable, using the voices of their lost loved ones to lure them away. Then she hollows them out, takes what's left of their spirit to fuel her own existence. That's, Liv began. Crazy, Herb supplied with a humorless smile. Perhaps, but these mountains held secrets long before white settlers arrived. The Abenaki knew to avoid certain parts of these forests, especially at night. They left offerings to appease the spirits that dwelled here. If what you're saying is true, I said, finding my voice, why would this hag be interested in me specifically? Your grief creates a beacon she can sense. Fresh loss has power. It's like blood in the water to a shark. He turned a page in his book, revealing an illustration of a tall, emaciated figure with long, stringy hair and unnaturally long fingers ending in claws. She'll use your mother's voice to get close to you. Then she'll take your form to lure your friend away, one by one. I felt sick. The stew in my stomach turned to lead. How do we get away from her? That's the problem, Herb said gravely. Now that she's marked you, she won't stop until she has what she wants, or until dawn breaks. She's strongest at night but can't bear direct sunlight. So we're safe here until morning? Liv asked. Herb's hesitation was all the answer we needed. She knows you're here, he said finally, and she's patient. Been hunting these woods for generations. My protections will keep her at bay for a while, but... He glanced toward the windows where darkness pressed against the glass like a living thing. As if on cue, a soft voice called from outside. Jessica. Honey, please, I need you. My mother's voice, exactly as I remembered it. A sob escaped me before I could stop it. Don't listen, Herb warned sharply. That's not your mother. Jessica, baby, the voice continued, closer now. I'm so cold out here. Why won't you let me in? Liv grabbed my hand, squeezing hard enough to hurt. Stay with us. Jess, that's not her. Something scraped against the side of the cabin. Long, dragging sounds that made the hairs on my neck stand up. We need to strengthen the protections, Herb said, moving quickly despite his age. He began pulling more dried herbs from his collection, crushing them in his palm and muttering words I couldn't understand. The scraping continued, circling the cabin now. Then came a sharp tapping at the windows like bone against glass. Jessica. Not my mother's voice anymore. Something using her voice, but wrong. Too hollow, too hungry. Let me in, or I'll take your friend instead. I'll wear her skin while I tear out your heart. Liv's face had gone pale, but her expression remained determined. What can we do to help? She asked Herb. He handed us each small bundles of herbs. Place these at each window and door, quickly now. We moved around the cabin, positioning the protective bundles as directed. Outside, the thing wearing my mother's voice grew increasingly agitated, its calls shifting between sweet entreaties and vicious threats. She's getting angry, Herb observed. That's good, it means the protections are working. The tapping at the windows became pounding. The cabin's sturdy walls seemed to shudder under the assault. A window cracked, not broken, but the glass splintered in a web-like pattern. Jessica. Now the voice was directly outside the damaged window, a sickening parody of my mother's loving tone. Look at me, sweetheart. Don't you want to see your mother one last time? Despite every rational thought screaming against it, I found myself drawn toward the window. Just one look. Something inside me whispered, just to see her face again. Jess, no, Liv shouted, lunging toward me. But I'd already reached the window, already peered through the cracked glass into the darkness beyond. What I saw there would haunt me for the rest of my life. It had my mother's face, or something close to it, stretched over a skull that was too large, too inhuman. The eyes were all wrong, black and depthless, reflecting nothing. Below the familiar yet wrong face, the body was impossibly tall and thin, limbs bent at unnatural angles, fingers elongated into foot-long claws that scraped against the cabin wall. It smiled when it saw me looking, a smile that split the face too wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "There you are," it crooned, pressing closer to the glass. "Come to me, Jessica. I've missed you so." I couldn't move, couldn't look away. Its eyes held me captive, boring into mine, draining my will to resist. I felt something tugging at my very essence, as if invisible hands were reaching through the glass to pull at threads of my soul. In my peripheral vision, I saw Herb moving urgently, heard Liv's voice calling my name from what seemed like a great distance. But all I could focus on was the creature outside, wearing my mother's face like an ill-fitting mask, drawing me toward it with a power I couldn't resist. My hand moved to the window latch of its own accord. "That's right," the creature whispered. "Let me in, Jessica. Let me take away your pain." Just as my fingers closed around the latch, something struck the creature from behind. It shrieked, a sound no human throat could make, and whirled away from the window. The spell broken, I staggered backward, collapsing to the floor as Liv rushed to my side. What happened?" I gasped. Herb was peering cautiously through the cracked window. "Someone else is out there," he said, "or something." A gunshot cracked through the night, followed by another inhuman shriek from the creature. Then came the sound of running footsteps approaching the cabin. A pounding at the door made us all jump. "Hello? Is anyone in there? I heard screams." A man's voice, deep and urgent. Herb looked at us uncertainly. "Could be a trick," he warned. "The hag is cunning." Another gunshot outside, closer this time, followed by a thud against the door. "Please, it's coming back." Liv made the decision for us, rushing to the door and throwing it open. A man literally fell inside, scrambling to his feet as Herb slammed the door shut behind him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in hunting gear, a rifle clutched in his trembling hands. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead. "What the hell was that thing?" he demanded, eyes wild with fear. "It looked like my wife, but—" He broke off, shuddering. "You're not alone in that experience," Herb said grimly. "What's your name, son?" "Michael. Michael Williams." He glanced between us. "I was hunting, tracking a buck. Got turned around somehow, ended up miles from where I started. Then I heard screaming." He shook his head. "I saw something attacking the cabin. Used my last 2 shots to drive it off." "You bought us some time," Herb acknowledged, "but it'll be back, and bullets won't kill it." "Then what will?" Liv asked the question we were all thinking. Herb's expression grew solemn. "Legend says its heart is kept separate from its body, hidden somewhere in the forest. Find and destroy the heart, and the hag dies with it." "Great," Michael said sarcastically. "So we just need to wander around in the dark forest looking for a magical heart while that thing hunts us. Perfect." "Not all of us," Herb said, fixing his gaze on me. "It wants you, Jessica. It's formed a connection. You could sense where the heart is hidden." "No," Liv interjected firmly. "Absolutely not. We're not using Jess as bait." "Not bait," Herb clarified. "A compass. The hag's power creates a kind of resonance with her heart. Jessica might be able to feel it, to lead us to it." "And how exactly am I supposed to do that?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady given the circumstances. Herb reached into a drawer and pulled out what looked like a crude compass, but instead of a traditional needle, it contained a small glass vial filled with dark liquid. "Blood from the hag's last victim," he explained, "collected by my grandfather. The blood will react when it's near the heart." "This is insane," Michael muttered. He wasn't wrong, but what choice did we have? The creature would keep coming for me, for all of us. and dawn was still hours away. "I'll do it," I said, standing up. "But we all go together. No one gets left behind." Liv looked like she wanted to argue, but instead just nodded grimly. "All for one." "We'll need protection," Herb said, gathering supplies, more herb bundles, a silver knife, vials of liquid I didn't want to identify. And light. The hag hates fire. We prepared as best we could, fashioning torches from materials in Herb's cabin. Michael reloaded his rifle, though we all knew it would only slow the creature down, not stop it. Herb gave me the blood compass, showing me how to hold it flat on my palm. "Let your mind go quiet," he instructed. "Feel for the pull." As soon as I held the compass, I felt it, a sickening tug in my chest, pulling me toward the east. The dark liquid in the vial shifted slightly in that direction. "I feel it," I whispered. Herb nodded gravely. "Then it's time. Stay together, keep your torches lit, and whatever happens, don't look directly into its eyes again." We stepped out into the darkness, the night air instantly chilling me to the bone. The forest loomed around us, trees shifting and sighing in a wind I couldn't feel. I held the compass before me, focusing on the nauseating pull that guided our steps. "This way," I said, leading our small group east, away from the cabin's safety. We moved as quietly as possible, though every twig snap and leaf rustle seemed amplified in the unnatural silence of the forest. The compass led us deeper into the woods, along paths that didn't appear on any map. "We're being watched," Michael whispered after we'd been walking for perhaps 20 minutes. He held his rifle ready, scanning the darkness beyond our torchlight. He was right. I could feel eyes on us, not just the hags, but others. The trees themselves seemed to bend toward us as we passed, branches reaching like fingers. "Old growth forest," Herb murmured. "The trees remember. They've seen the hag's victims pass this way before." "Not helping." "Herb," Liv muttered. The compass pulled stronger now, the dark blood swirling agitatedly in its vial. We were getting closer to something. A clearing appeared ahead, a perfect circle of open ground with a massive, gnarled oak at its center. The tree was ancient, its trunk twisted and knotted, bark blackened as if by fire. Even from a distance, I could tell there was something wrong about it. It seemed to pulse with a sickly light, visible only at the corners of my vision. "That's it," Herb breathed. "The hanging oak, said to be the first tree the hag corrupted when she came to these mountains." The compass was practically vibrating in my hand now, the blood within bubbling and churning. "The heart is inside the tree," I said with certainty, though I didn't know how I knew. "Then let's burn it down," Michael suggested, raising his torch. "No," Herb grabbed his arm. "Fire will only make it stronger. We need to cut out the heart with silver." He raised the knife he'd brought, its blade gleaming dully in the torchlight. Before we could approach the tree, a familiar voice echoed through the clearing. "Jessica, why are you hurting me?" My mother's voice, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Don't listen," Liv reminded me, gripping my shoulder. "You've brought others to destroy me," the voice continued, hardening into something less human. "After I offered to take away your pain, after I offered to reunite you with your mother." The shadows around the clearing began to move, coalescing into the tall, twisted form of the hag. This time she didn't bother maintaining the illusion of my mother's appearance. Her true form was revealed, a nightmarish fusion of woman and tree, skin like bark, limbs elongated and jointed in impossible ways, face a hollow mask with those terrible black eyes. "Stay back," Michael shouted, firing his rifle. The bullet struck the creature in the shoulder, causing it to stagger but not fall. It hissed, a sound like wind through dead leaves, and lunged forward with unnatural speed. Herb thrust his torch toward it, and the creature recoiled from the flames. "Get to the tree," he shouted at me. "Find the heart. We'll hold it off." I hesitated, unwilling to leave them. "Go," Liv yelled, pushing me toward the oak. "We've got this!" I ran for the tree, compass clutched tightly in my hand. Behind me, I heard shouts and the creature's unearthly shrieking. The massive oak loomed before me, its trunk riddled with knots and hollows that looked disturbingly like screaming faces. The compass led me to a particular knot in the trunk, about chest height. It looked like any other deformity in the ancient wood, but as I placed my palm against it, I felt a pulse, a heartbeat, steady and strong. "Here," I called out. "It's here." I looked back to see my companion struggling to keep the hag at bay. Michael was down, clutching a bleeding arm. Liv and Herb circled the creature with their torches, forcing it to keep its distance. But they were tiring, and the hag was growing bolder, swiping at them with those terrible claws. I needed to act quickly. Taking Herb's silver knife, I began to cut into the knot in the trunk. The wood parted easily under the blade, too easily, as if it wanted to be opened. Dark sap oozed from the cut, warm and sticky like blood. The hag screamed, a sound of pure rage and pain that shook the very ground. It whirled toward me, abandoning its attack on the others. "Jessica, look out!" Liv shouted. I dug the knife deeper, frantically carving around the knot. The hag charged across the clearing, moving with that terrible jerking speed. I wouldn't have time to finish before it reached me. Just as the creature's claws were about to close around my throat, Michael tackled it from the side, sending them both crashing to the ground. "Finish it!" he yelled, grappling with the thrashing hag. With a final desperate effort, I pried the knot free from the trunk. It came away in my hands, a glistening, pulsing mass of wood and tissue that beat like a heart. The hag howled, throwing Michael aside with inhuman strength. It staggered toward me, movements jerky and uncoordinated now, as if it was losing control of its limbs. "The knife!" Herb shouted. "Pierce the heart!" The hag lunged at me just as I plunged the silver blade into the pulsing heart. The effect was immediate. The creature froze mid-attack, its body convulsing. A terrible keening sound emanated from its throat as cracks appeared across its bark-like skin, light spilling from within. "Get back!" Herb warned, pulling me away from the creature. We retreated to the edge of the clearing as the hag's body began to disintegrate, the cracks widening, more light pouring forth. The creature reached one gnarled hand toward me in a final, desperate gesture before it shattered completely, exploding into a shower of splinters and ash that rained down across the clearing. In the sudden silence that followed, we stood frozen, hardly daring to believe it was over. The heart in my hands had crumbled to dust, leaving only the silver knife gleaming in the dirt. "Is it dead?" Liv asked finally. Herb nodded slowly. "For now, at least. These old evils have a way of returning, given enough time." Michael sat up, grimacing as he clutched his injured arm. "Next time, I'm sticking to the main trails." A hint of light touched the eastern horizon, the first promise of dawn. With the hag's destruction, the forest already felt different. Lighter somehow, the oppressive presence lifted. "Let's get back to the cabin," Herb suggested. "Tend to our wounds. When it's fully light, I'll help you find your way back to the main trail." As we made our way back through the forest, I felt something shifting inside me, the beginning of healing, perhaps. The grief that had hollowed me out, made me vulnerable to the hag's call, was still there, but it no longer seemed like the all-consuming force it had been. "You okay?" Liv asked softly, falling in step beside me. "I think I might be," I replied honestly. "Eventually." She squeezed my hand. "Your mother would be proud of you, you know, the real her." I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. For the first time since her death, the thought of my mother brought comfort rather than crushing pain. We made it back to Herb's cabin as morning light filtered through the trees. The forest looked almost ordinary in daylight, beautiful even. Birds had returned, their songs filling the air. A doe and her fawn watched us curiously from a thicket before bounding away. Herb treated Michael's wounds, deep gashes that would scar but wouldn't kill him. We rested, ate, and gathered our strength. None of us spoke much about what had happened, as if putting it into words might somehow invite the darkness back. "The trails should be clear now," Herb told us as he packed supplies into our backpacks. The hag's influence distorted the paths, made them loop back on themselves. With her gone, you'll find your way easily enough. "You're not coming with us?" Liv asked. The old man shook his head. "This is my home. Has been for 40 years. The forest needs a guardian, someone who remembers the old stories, the old protections. In case something like the hag returns," Michael guessed. "There are older things than the hag in these mountains," Herb said quietly. "Sleeping things. Best left undisturbed." He handed me a small leather pouch on a cord. "Wear this. It will help shield your grief from anything that might sense it." I slipped it around my neck, feeling its comforting weight against my chest. "Thank you. For everything." He nodded, eyes creasing with a gentle smile. "Remember what you learned here. Grief makes us vulnerable, yes, but confronting it, that makes us strong." We left Herb's cabin around noon, following his directions back to the main trail. True to his word, the forest seemed to open before us, the path clear and direct. By mid-afternoon, we reached familiar territory, the marked trails of Camel's Hump State Park. Michael parted ways with us there, heading toward the ranger station to report his hunting accident. We knew he wouldn't mention the hag. Some stories aren't meant for official reports. "Will anyone believe us if we tell them what really happened?" I asked Liv as we hiked the final miles back to our car. "Probably not," she admitted, "but we'll know." We reached the parking lot as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the mountains. Looking back at the looming peak of Camel's Hump, I felt a strange mixture of terror and gratitude. The mountain had nearly killed me, yet somehow had also started to heal me. "Want to try again next summer?" Liv asked with a playful nudge to my shoulder. "Maybe stick to the main trails next time?" I surprised myself by not immediately refusing. "Maybe," I said, "but let's go somewhere with fewer ancient evil spirits." She laughed and I joined her, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't experienced since before my mother's death and my divorce. It felt good, like breaking through ice to reach air. We loaded our gear into the car and drove away from Camel's Hump as darkness settled over the Green Mountains. In the rearview mirror, I watched the silhouette of the mountain recede. For just a moment, I thought I saw a tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching our departure. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a trick of the fading light, I told myself. Just a memory of terror, gradually fading like all memories do. But sometimes, in my dreams, I still hear my mother's voice calling my name from the darkness. And I still wake up wondering if some small fragment of the hag survived, waiting in the ancient forests of Vermont for someone else burdened by grief, someone else it can hollow out and claim. And on those nights, I hold the leather pouch Herb gave me and whisper the protective words he taught me, just to be safe. Because some mountains keep their secrets, and some darkness never truly dies. The grief that made me vulnerable to the hag is still with me, but it's different now. Tempered by survival, by facing the worst the darkness could offer and emerging on the other side. Changed, but intact. My name is Jessica Davis, and I am a survivor. Of divorce, of loss, of grief, and of the thing that waits in the forests of Camel's Hump, feeding on pain and loneliness. Whether you believe my story or not doesn't matter, but if you find yourself hiking those remote eastern trails, and you hear a loved one's voice calling your name from the darkness, run, don't look back, and whatever you do, don't answer. My name is Rebecca Hill, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Green Mountains of Vermont last autumn, when the leaves were turning and the air had just enough bite to make you feel alive. I wish I'd never felt so alive then, because now I understand how close death really is. I'd always been the adventurous one among my friends, Growing up in Burlington, I'd spent weekends hiking the nearby trails with my father until he passed when I was 16. After that, hiking became both an escape and a connection to him. My friends, Stephanie Nguyen and Laura Adams, had finally agreed to join me for a weekend trip to one of Vermont's most remote areas, Glastonbury Mountain in the Green Mountain National Forest. Glastonbury has a reputation. The locals call it Glastonbury Wilderness for a reason. It's part of the Bennington Triangle, where multiple people have disappeared over the decades. The area has its fair share of legends, from stories of a man-eating stone giant the Abenaki people called Walloomsack, to whispers of something called the Bennington Monster. I'd always laughed these stories off as local color, something to tell around campfires to spook tourists. "You sure about this place, Becca?" Laura asked as we parked my Subaru at the nearly empty West Ridge trailhead. Her fingers nervously twisted the end of her dark braid. "I looked it up last night, and some of the stories are pretty creepy." Stephanie shrugged on her backpack, her practical nature showing in how meticulously she'd packed. "It's just stories people tell to keep the trails from getting overcrowded," she said, though I noticed she checked her phone signal before we started out. "No service," she muttered. "We won't need it," I assured them both. "I've got a satellite messenger for emergencies, and I've hiked plenty of remote trails before. Besides, the foliage is perfect right now. Trust me, it'll be worth it." The first few miles of our hike were everything I'd promised. Spectacular autumn colors, crisp air, and the quiet serenity that only comes when you're truly away from civilization. The trail wound through dense forests of maple, oak, and birch, their leaves a tapestry of red, orange, and gold. Now and then, we'd emerge at an overlook and see nothing but rolling mountains stretching to the horizon. "Okay, I admit it," Laura said during one of our breaks, taking a photo of the valley below. "This is pretty amazing." Stephanie seemed to be enjoying herself too, her earlier nervousness replaced by curiosity about the various plants we encountered. She was working on her doctorate in botany, and she couldn't help pointing out interesting specimens as we hiked. We'd planned to reach the Long Trail shelter by nightfall, a simple three-sided structure maintained by the Green Mountain Club where hikers could sleep. As afternoon began to wane, however, I realized we were moving slower than I'd anticipated. Stephanie and Laura weren't used to the terrain, and our pace had been leisurely. "We should pick up the pace a bit," I suggested, checking my map. "We've got maybe 2 hours of good daylight left." About an hour later, we came to a fork in the trail that wasn't on my map. One path continued along the ridge as expected, while another descended slightly into a hollow thick with ancient-looking trees. "That's weird," I muttered, pulling out my compass. "The trail should just continue straight here." "Maybe it's a newer trail," Laura suggested. Stephanie frowned, looking down the path into the hollow. "Those trees look different. I think those are eastern hemlocks. They can live for hundreds of years." I checked my GPS device, but it was giving inconsistent readings, the coordinates jumping around. "Something's wrong with the signal," I said, tapping the screen. "Great," Laura sighed. "So, which way?" I studied both paths. The one along the ridge looked less traveled, while the one into the hollow showed signs of recent use. "Let's take the hollow trail," I decided. "It looks like others have gone that way recently." That was my first mistake. The hollow trail descended gently at first, taking us into a section of forest that felt noticeably different from what we'd been hiking through. The hemlocks Stephanie had identified formed a dense canopy overhead, blocking much of the remaining daylight. The ground was carpeted with moss and ferns, and the air felt cooler, damper. Most striking was the silence. We could no longer hear birds or the rustling of small animals. "It's so quiet," Laura whispered as if speaking normally would somehow violate the stillness. "Old-growth forests are often like this," Stephanie said, but she sounded uncertain. "The canopy blocks sound from above and the moss absorbs noise." I checked my map again, trying to figure out where exactly we were. We should have reached the junction with the long trail by now, I admitted. "I think we took a wrong turn." The trail continued to descend, and the light continued to fade. I was about to suggest turning back when we emerged into a small clearing where the remains of a stone foundation formed a rough rectangle. In the center stood a single, blackened chimney. "What is this place?" Laura asked, peering at the ruins. "Probably an old homestead," I replied, though I didn't recall reading about any settlements in this area. Vermont has tons of these. Farms that were abandoned generations ago when the families moved west for better land. Stephanie approached the chimney, examining the stonework. "It's old," she confirmed. "But someone's been here recently." She pointed to the remains of a campfire within the hearth of the chimney, the ashes relatively fresh. "Well, that settles it," I said with more confidence than I felt. "If other hikers have camped here, we can too. It's getting too dark to keep searching for the shelter." We set up our tent near the stone foundation, and I got a fire going in the old chimney hearth. As darkness fell completely, we heated our freeze-dried meals and tried to keep our spirits up, though I could tell we were all unsettled by our unexpected detour. "So, about those Bennington Triangle disappearances?" Laura said as we huddled around the fire. "What's the story there?" I wished she hadn't asked. "Just typical wilderness disappearances," I said dismissively. "People go hiking unprepared, get lost, succumb to the elements. Happens everywhere. I read that between 1945 and 1950, 5 people vanished without a trace," Laura continued, "including a college student who disappeared from the long trail. They never found her body." "Laura, come on," I groaned. "Not the best campfire story when we're actually here." Stephanie had been quiet, staring into the flames. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" she asked suddenly. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. I'd had the same feeling for the past hour but had been trying to ignore it. "It's just the dark forest playing tricks on your mind," I said. "Happens to everyone in the wilderness at night." But even as I said it, I scanned the tree line. The firelight created shifting shadows among the hemlocks, making it seem as if the darkness itself was moving. For a split second, I thought I saw something pale move between 2 distant trees. Something tall and thin. I blinked, and it was gone. "Maybe we should turn in," I suggested, suddenly eager to be zipped safely inside our tent. "We'll need to start early tomorrow to get back on the right trail." None of us slept well that night. The silence of the forest was occasionally broken by sounds we couldn't identify. Not quite animal, not quite human. A sort of hollow knocking that seemed to come from different directions. Once, I was certain I heard whispering, so close it could have been right outside our tent. When I finally did drift off near dawn, I dreamed of pale figures standing motionless among the trees, watching our camp with eyes that reflected the dying embers of our fire. I woke to Laura shaking my shoulder. "Rebecca, wake up! Stephanie's gone." I sat up, instantly alert. "What do you mean, gone?" "Her sleeping bag is empty. I thought she just went to pee, but it's been almost half an hour." I checked my watch, 6:43 a.m. The early morning light filtered weakly through the tent fabric. I quickly pulled on my boots and jacket and unzipped the tent. The clearing looked different in the morning light, smaller somehow, and the stone foundation more dilapidated than it had seemed the night before. A thin mist hung between the trees, giving everything a dreamlike quality. "Stephanie," I called out. "Steph." No answer. "Maybe she went to collect water," I suggested, though we had purified enough the night before. "Let's check the perimeter." Laura and I circled the clearing, calling Stephanie's name. We found nothing until we reached the far side, where the trail continued downhill. There, pressed into a patch of soft earth, was a clear footprint, Stephanie's hiking boot heading deeper into the hollow. "Why would she go off alone?" Laura whispered, her face pale with worry. "Let's pack up and follow her," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "She can't have gone far." We quickly broke camp, stuffing everything haphazardly into our packs. As we worked, I noticed something odd about the chimney where we'd built our fire. In the daylight, I could see symbols carved into some of the stones. crude figures that might have been human but weren't quite right, with elongated limbs and oversized heads. "Laura, look at this," I said, pointing to the carvings. She glanced at them and shuddered. "Can we just go find Steph and get out of here?" We shouldered our packs and followed the trail in the direction of Stephanie's footprint. The path continued to descend, the hemlock forest growing denser. The morning mist persisted, reducing visibility and making it hard to see more than 20 yards ahead. The silence was even more oppressive in the daylight, not even the sound of wind in the branches. After about 20 minutes, we came to another small clearing where a massive hemlock had fallen, creating a natural bridge across a narrow ravine. And there, sitting on the trunk, was Stephanie. "Steph!" Laura called out in relief, rushing forward. "We've been looking everywhere for you." Stephanie turned slowly to look at us. Something was wrong. Her movements were stiff, unnatural, and when she fully faced us, I felt my blood turn to ice. It was Stephanie, but her eyes were different. The pupils dilated so much that her eyes appeared almost completely black. And she was smiling. Stephanie rarely smiled, and never like this. A wide, taut grimace that stretched her lips unnaturally. "I found something," she said, her voice oddly flat. "Down in the ravine. You need to see it." Laura had stopped in her tracks, sensing the same wrongness I did. "Steph, are you okay?" she asked cautiously. "Never better," Stephanie replied, still with that terrible smile. "I've never seen anything like what's down there. It's enlightening." I took a step back, pulling Laura with me. "Actually, we need to get going," I said. "We're lost, remember? We need to find the main trail." "Lost?" Stephanie tilted her head at an uncomfortable angle. "No, Rebecca. We're exactly where we're supposed to be, where it's been waiting." "Where what's been waiting?" Laura's voice shook. Stephanie stood up from the fallen tree in a single fluid motion that seemed to defy natural human movement. "The hollower," she said simply. "It's been so lonely, so hungry." My instincts were screaming at me to run, but I couldn't leave Stephanie. "Something's wrong with her," I whispered to Laura. "Maybe she ate something, some kind of plant that's making her hallucinate." "Does she look like she's hallucinating to you?" Laura hissed back. "We need to get out of here." Stephanie took a step toward us, still smiling. "Don't you want to see?" It showed me things. What's underneath? What's inside all of us? She reached toward her own chest and, to my horror, dug her fingers into her sternum as if her flesh were clay. "It's so beautiful once you see it." That was enough. I grabbed Laura's arm and turned to run back the way we came, but the trail was gone. Where we had just walked was now dense underbrush and trees so tightly packed they couldn't possibly have grown there overnight. "No, no, no," I muttered, spinning around to look for another escape route. "You can't leave," Stephanie called, her voice now overlaid with something else, a hollow reverberation that seemed to come from the air around us rather than her throat. "It needs to show you too." From the ravine beneath the fallen tree came a sound, the same knocking we'd heard in the night, but louder now, more purposeful. Then something began to emerge from below. I can't adequately describe what I saw crawling up from that ravine. My mind doesn't want to hold the image, and for that, I'm grateful. It was vaguely humanoid but wrong in every proportion, with limbs that bent in impossible directions and skin that seemed to shift between solid and transparent. Where its face should have been was something like a hollow mask with countless small holes, and from those holes came the knocking sound. Laura screamed. The sound broke my paralysis, and I spotted a gap between the trees that seemed passable. "Come on!" I shouted, pulling her with me as we crashed through the underbrush, away from Stephanie and the thing from the ravine. We ran blindly, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, I could hear Stephanie's laughter, accompanied by that awful knocking sound, growing more distant, but somehow also more present, as if it was inside my head now. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to stretch and compress, minutes feeling like hours, yet the light never changing, the mist never lifting. Eventually, we had to stop, both of us gasping for breath, sides aching. "What?" Laura panted. "What was that thing? What happened to Stephanie?" I shook my head, unable to answer. My GPS device was completely dead now, not even powering on. The compass was working but spinning wildly, the needle rotating in complete circles. "We need to keep moving," I said once I could speak. "Uphill. We came down into this hollow, so we need to climb out." We chose the steepest slope we could find and began to ascend, using tree trunks and roots to pull ourselves up. The climb was exhausting, the forest floor slippery with decaying leaves and moss. Several times one of us would slip and slide back down, losing precious ground. As we climbed, I began to notice strange things on the trees. Small bundles of twigs bound with what looked like human hair, hanging from branches. Stones arranged in patterns on the ground. Once I put my hand on what I thought was a mossy rock, only to discover it was a small animal skull, bleached white with age. "Don't look at them," I told Laura when she noticed the grisly markers. "Just keep climbing." The knocking sound had faded, but now we began to hear something else. Singing. A woman's voice, somewhere in the distance, singing a lullaby I half recognized. The melody was familiar but distorted, the words just out of reach of understanding. "Do you hear that?" Laura whispered. I nodded. "Ignore it." The singing grew louder as we climbed, sometimes seeming to come from directly ahead, sometimes from behind us. Occasionally, I thought I caught a glimpse of movement through the trees, a figure in what looked like old-fashioned clothing, moving parallel to our course. After what felt like hours, the slope finally began to level out, and the hemlock forest gradually gave way to the more diverse hardwoods we'd been hiking through before our detour. The mist thinned, and for the first time since morning, I heard a bird call. "I think we're getting out," I said, hope rising in my chest. We emerged onto what was clearly a maintained trail, wide, with occasional trail markers nailed to trees. The relief was overwhelming. "We made it," Laura sobbed, sinking to her knees in exhaustion. I checked my GPS device again, and to my surprise it powered on, showing our location on the long trail, about 2 miles south of where we should have been. My first instinct was to continue hiking north, to put as much distance between us and the hollow as possible. But we needed help. "We have to report Stephanie missing," I said, the reality of our situation crashing down on me. "Whatever happened to her, we can't just leave her out here." Laura looked up at me, her face streaked with dirt and tears. "That wasn't Stephanie anymore, Becca. You saw her. You saw that thing." "We still have to try," I insisted, though part of me knew she was right. "There's a ranger station at the next road crossing. We'll go there." The hike to the road crossing took another 2 hours. By the time we reached the ranger station, a small cabin with a Park Service vehicle parked outside, it was late afternoon. My legs were trembling with exhaustion, and Laura looked ready to collapse. The ranger on duty, an older man with a weathered face and gray-streaked beard named Jim Hollister, listened to our story with increasing concern. When we finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You say this happened in a hollow with an old stone foundation?" he finally asked. I nodded. "Yes, somewhere southeast of here. We got lost and took a wrong turn." Ranger Hollister rubbed his face. "There's no hollow with ruins marked on any of our maps in that area." "Well, it's there," Laura snapped, "and our friend is still out there with whatever that thing was." The ranger picked up his radio. "I'll call in a search team, but—" He hesitated. "That area has a history. The locals call it Whispering Hollow. Most won't go near it, especially not at night." "Why not?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Stories going back to colonial times. Settlers who went mad, killed their families. Hikers disappearing. Strange lights and sounds." He shook his head. "Most of it's just superstition, but there's been enough real incidents that we take reports seriously." Within an hour, a search and rescue team had assembled. 4 rangers, including Hollister, all armed, accompanied by 2 dogs. They took our statements again, this time recording them, and asked us to mark on their maps where we thought we'd entered the hollow. "You 2 stay here," Hollister instructed. "Get some rest, eat something. We'll radio when we find her." Laura and I waited in the ranger station, too exhausted and traumatized to do much more than sit in stunned silence. A female ranger who stayed behind gave us hot coffee and sandwiches, then tried to distract us with casual conversation, but eventually gave up when it was clear we couldn't focus. As darkness fell, the radio crackled to life. "Base, this is Hollister. Over." The female ranger grabbed the radio. "This is Base. Did you find her?" "Over." There was a pause, then, "Negative. We found the stone foundation, but no sign of the missing hiker. We're continuing the search, but visibility is poor and—" His voice trailed off. "And what?" "Over," the ranger prompted. "The dogs won't go any farther. They're spooked by something. We're going to have to come back at first light. Over." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. They weren't going to find Stephanie. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Whatever had happened in that hollow, whatever had taken her, it wasn't going to let her go easily. The search continued for 5 days. They found no trace of Stephanie. No backpack, no clothing, nothing. On the 6th day, they discovered her boot, the same one that had made the footprint we'd followed, sitting perfectly upright in the middle of the trail near the stone foundation, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. The official report listed Stephanie Nguyen as missing, presumed dead from exposure or a fall. Laura and I knew better, but who would believe what we'd really seen? We gave our statements, attended the memorial service Stephanie's family held when the search was finally called off, and tried to move on with our lives. But the hollow wouldn't let go of us so easily. Laura moved to California a month later, saying she couldn't bear to be near mountains anymore. We stayed in touch by phone, but our conversations became less frequent as she tried to put the experience behind her. Then, 3 months after our trip, she called me in the middle of the night. "I can hear it, Becca," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The knocking. It's coming from inside my walls." 2 days later, Laura's roommate found their apartment empty, the front door locked from the inside. Laura was gone, her cell phone left behind on her neatly made bed. On the bathroom mirror, written in what investigators later determined was her own blood, were the words, "The Hollower waits." As for me, I haven't set foot on a hiking trail since. I moved from Burlington to Boston, surrounding myself with the comforting noise and light of the city. But sometimes, especially when it's quiet, I hear it, that gentle knocking, like something tapping patiently on wood. And sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I see Stephanie's face with that terrible smile and those black eyes. Worst of all are the dreams. In them, I'm back in Whispering Hollow, but this time, I'm the one sitting on the fallen tree, waiting. My fingers dig into my own chest, and I feel nothing but hollow space inside, and I'm smiling as I watch new hikers approach, lost and confused, looking for a trail that no longer exists. In the dreams, my mouth opens and the knocking sound comes out. And I know, in the moment before I wake screaming, that the hollower isn't just waiting for me. It's already inside. My name is Jessica Davis, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Green Mountains of Vermont, near a place called Shadow Lake, not far from the small town of Glover. What started as a weekend escape from the pressures of my job as a pharmaceutical researcher turned into something I still struggle to explain, something that haunts my every waking moment and terrorizes my dreams. I'd been pushing myself too hard at work. 60-hour weeks had become my norm, and my therapist had been insistent that I needed to disconnect, truly disconnect, if I wanted to avoid a complete breakdown. "Go somewhere with no cell service," she'd said. "Force yourself to be present." When my colleague Melissa Scott mentioned her family owned a remote cabin near Shadow Lake that I could use, It seemed like the universe was giving me a sign. The drive up from Boston took longer than expected. Rain had made the mountain roads treacherous, and by the time I turned onto the unmarked dirt path that Melissa had described, darkness had completely enveloped the landscape. My headlights cut through sheets of rain, illuminating dense pine forests on either side of the narrow road. The trees seemed to bend inward, as if watching my approach with curiosity or hunger. The cabin itself was rustic but charming, a two-bedroom A-frame with a large stone fireplace and windows that, during daylight hours, would offer spectacular views of Shadow Lake and the surrounding mountains. That night, however, they reflected only my exhausted face and the shadows that seemed to move independently behind me. I lugged my bags inside, grateful that Melissa had arranged for the place to be stocked with firewood and basic supplies. After starting a fire and heating a can of soup, I settled into an armchair with my book, a historical novel I'd been meaning to read for months. The rain continued its assault on the roof, creating a white noise that, combined with the crackling fire, should have been deeply relaxing. But something felt wrong from the first moment. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few minutes I'd glance up from my book, certain I'd seen movement in my peripheral vision. The wind whistled through some unseen crack in the cabin's structure, creating a sound almost like whispering. Low, urgent, unintelligible. I blamed it on exhaustion and city-dweller paranoia. After finishing my soup and reading another chapter, I decided to turn in for the night. The master bedroom featured a queen-sized bed with a handmade quilt and windows on two walls. I closed the curtains, changed into pajamas, and slid under the covers with my book, determined to read until I was sleepy enough to overcome my unease. That's when I heard it, a soft thud from the main room, like something being set down on the wooden floor. I froze, straining to listen. Nothing but the rain and wind, then, unmistakably, the creak of a floorboard. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly small. No response. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my phone as a makeshift weapon, useless as an actual phone. Melissa hadn't been kidding about the lack of service, and crept toward the bedroom door. Heart pounding, I yanked it open, simultaneously hitting the light switch for the main room. Empty. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting long shadows across the room. Nothing seemed disturbed. I checked the front door, still locked. Same with the back door and all the windows. After a thorough search revealed nothing amiss, I chalked it up to the settling of an old cabin and returned to bed, though I left the bedroom door open and the light on in the main room. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the storm and strange dreams of being buried alive, dirt filling my mouth as I tried to scream. I awoke to silence. The rain had stopped, and weak morning light filtered through the curtains. For a moment, I felt foolish about my fears from the night before. This place was exactly what I needed. Peaceful, isolated, a chance to reset. After a breakfast of instant coffee and oatmeal, I decided to explore the area. Melissa had mentioned several hiking trails nearby, and I was eager to see Shadow Lake in the daylight. The air outside was crisp and clean, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. The forest around the cabin was even more dense than it had appeared the night before. Tall pines grew so close together in places that it was impossible to see more than a few yards into the woods. I found a well-trodden path leading down toward what I assumed was the lake and followed it. The morning was still and quiet in a way I wasn't used to. No traffic noise, no sirens, no neighbors, no construction, just the occasional bird call and the soft crunch of pine needles beneath my boots. After about 15 minutes of walking, the trees thinned and Shadow Lake appeared before me. It was larger than I'd expected, stretching perhaps 2 miles across, surrounded by dense forest and backed by the rolling green mountains. The water was still, reflecting the cloudy sky like a massive mirror. Beautiful, yet somehow ominous in its perfect stillness. I spotted a small dock a little way down the shoreline and made my way toward it. As I approached, I noticed someone sitting at the end, an elderly man in a flannel shirt and worn jeans, fishing rod in hand. He turned as I stepped onto the wooden planks, his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile. "Morning," he called. "You must be staying at the McAllister place." "Yes," I replied, approaching cautiously. "I'm borrowing it from a friend for the weekend." He nodded slowly. "Don't get many visitors up here, especially not this time of year. Name's Harold Fletcher, been fishing these waters for 67 years. "Jessica," I offered, stopping a respectful distance away. "Jessica Davis." Harold regarded me with pale blue eyes that seemed to be evaluating something about me. "You're alone up there?" It wasn't really a question. "Just for a few days," I said, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. "Just needed some quiet time." Harold made a sound that might have been a laugh or a scoff. "Plenty of quiet around Shadow Lake, sometimes too much." He reeled in his line, which was empty of both bait and fish. "You planning on hiking while you're here?" "I thought I might. Are there good trails nearby?" "There's the old logging road that circles the lake and a few paths up into the mountains." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "If you do go hiking, stick to the marked trails. These woods, it's easy to get turned around, and stay out of the North Woods." "The North Woods." Harold nodded toward the far end of the lake, where the forest seemed darker, the trees growing impossibly close together. "Beyond that ridge, local folks don't go there. Bad things happen." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. Every rural area had its forbidden zones and superstitions. "What kind of bad things?" "People go missing," Harold said flatly. "Or they come back changed." He began packing up his fishing gear. "You seem like a sensible girl, so I'm sure you'll be fine. Just be back at the cabin before dark. Shadow Lake isn't a place for nighttime wandering." With that cryptic warning, Harold trudged past me and up a different path than the one I'd come down. I watched him disappear into the trees, unsettled by the encounter but also dismissing it as local color, an old-timer trying to spook the city girl. I spent another hour by the lake, skipping stones and enjoying the isolation that had seemed so threatening the night before. Eventually, my rumbling stomach reminded me that it was past lunchtime, and I headed back to the cabin. As I approached, something seemed off. I was certain I'd closed the front door when I left. I specifically remembered checking it twice, my city paranoia in full effect. Now it stood ajar, just an inch or two, but definitely open. I stopped in my tracks, scanning the area around the cabin. Nothing moved, no cars beside my own, no footprints in the muddy path leading to the door. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone there?" Only silence answered me. I considered my options. It was possible I was mistaken about closing the door, or perhaps the latch was faulty and it had blown open. The alternative, that someone had entered the cabin while I was gone, was too disturbing to contemplate in that moment. Gathering my courage, I approached and pushed the door fully open, half expecting to find the place ransacked. Instead, everything looked exactly as I'd left it, with one exception. My book, which I'd left on the bedside table, now sat in the center of the kitchen table, open to a page near the middle. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I was absolutely certain I hadn't moved the book. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was open to a page where one passage had been underlined in pencil. "The forest keeps its secrets buried deep, but nothing stays buried forever." The line wasn't familiar. I hadn't been far enough in the book to have read it yet, and I never marked up books anyway. I dropped it as if it had burned me. Someone had been in the cabin. Someone had touched my things, left me a message. I backed toward the door, ready to flee to my car, when I noticed something else. A small stack of yellowed Polaroid photographs on the counter that definitely hadn't been there before. Against my better judgment, I approached and looked at the top image. It showed a group of people standing in front of the very cabin I was in, dated 1978 according to handwriting at the bottom. 5 smiling people, 3 men and 2 women, all in their 20s dressed in the hiking gear of that era. I flipped to the next photo. The same group at what appeared to be Shadow Lake, mugging for the camera. The third photo made my blood run cold. It showed 4 of the 5 people, their expressions now serious, holding up a hand-drawn missing poster for the 5th member, a tall man with dark hair and glasses. The 4th photo was taken at night, just 3 people now, their faces illuminated by flashlight beams, their expressions terrified. The 5th and final image was the most disturbing, just a dark shape standing among trees, humanoid but somehow wrong, its proportions subtly distorted, its face, if it had one, obscured by shadow. Written on the back of this last photo, in the same shaky handwriting, "It took the form of David, but it wasn't him anymore." I dropped the photos and backed away. This had to be some sick joke, perhaps Melissa's idea of creating an atmospheric experience for her city friend. But a call to Melissa went straight to voicemail, and anyway, she hadn't seemed the type for elaborate pranks. I considered leaving immediately. I could be back in Boston by evening, could check into a hotel with bright lights and people and locked doors, but some combination of stubbornness, rationality, and misplaced pride stopped me. I wasn't going to be chased away by what was most likely the work of local teenagers who had spotted an outsider and decided to have some fun. I spent the rest of the afternoon on high alert, jumping at every creak and groan of the cabin. I checked and rechecked the locks, eventually wedging a chair under both doorknobs for good measure. As daylight began to fade, I built up the fire, turned on every light in the cabin, and settled in with my book, deliberately choosing to sit in a different spot than the one indicated by the open book I'd found. Night fell quickly in the mountains. The darkness outside the windows was absolute, making them into black mirrors that reflected the cabin's interior. I found myself avoiding looking directly at them, afraid of what or who I might see looking back. Around 8 p.m., as I was heating water for tea, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. I froze in the sudden darkness, illuminated only by the fire. Power outages were to be expected in remote areas, especially after storms, but the timing felt deliberate, malevolent. I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to locate the emergency candles Melissa had said would be in a kitchen drawer. As I lit them, placing them strategically around the main room, I tried to calm my racing heart with rational explanations. But rational thought was becoming increasingly difficult as the night pressed in around me. With the fire and candles, I had enough light to see, but the corners of the room remained in shadow. I returned to my chair, book in hand, though I couldn't focus on the words. Every few minutes I'd look up, certain I'd seen movement in those dark corners. Then I heard it, a soft tapping at the window behind me. I whirled around but saw nothing in the glass except my own reflection, distorted by the flickering candlelight. The tapping came again, more insistent, still nothing visible. "Who's there?" I called out, hating how my voice quavered. The tapping stopped. For a long moment there was only silence and the soft popping of the fire. Then, from the other side of the cabin, another sound, scratching, like fingernails on wood, coming from the bedroom. I grabbed a poker from the fireplace, its weight reassuring in my hands. "I've called the police," I lied loudly. "They're on their way." The scratching stopped. Then, chillingly, it was replaced by a low, raspy chuckle that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I backed into a corner, poker raised, eyes darting between the windows and the bedroom door. The rational part of my brain was rapidly losing ground to primal fear. Something was in the cabin with me, or outside it, trying to get in, and I was utterly alone. The minutes stretched into an hour. The sounds didn't repeat, but my terror didn't subside. I couldn't bring myself to check the bedroom, instead remaining vigilant in my corner, jumping at every pop of the fire and creak of the old cabin. Eventually, exhaustion began to outweigh fear. I hadn't slept well the night before, and the day's stress had drained me. My eyes grew heavy despite my best efforts. I jerked awake several times from microsleeps, each time certain that the shadows in the room had moved closer. I must have finally fallen fully asleep, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up on the floor, still in the corner, poker clutched to my chest, daylight streaming through the windows. The fire had died to embers, and several candles had burned out completely. I got to my feet, stiff and disoriented. The cabin was silent except for the normal creaks and settling sounds of an old structure. The power was still out, but it hardly mattered in the daylight. I checked the bedroom cautiously. Nothing seemed disturbed. No scratch marks on the door, no sign that anything unusual had happened. Had I imagined it all? Had exhaustion and isolation, combined with Harold's warning and the strange photos, caused me to have some sort of episode? I made instant coffee using water heated over the remaining embers and tried to think rationally. The open door could have been my mistake. The book, well, perhaps I had absently-mindedly moved it and forgotten. The photos were harder to explain away, but maybe they'd been there all along, part of the cabin's decor that I'd overlooked in my initial exploration. As for the noises in the night, old cabins made all sorts of sounds, and forests were full of animals that could scratch and tap at walls. The laughter, that I had no explanation for, but I was willing to accept that, in my terrified state, I might have misinterpreted some natural sound. I decided to stay one more night. To leave now would be to let fear win, to carry this unresolved experience back to Boston where it would fester in my imagination. If nothing happened tonight, I could dismiss the previous night as an anomaly brought on by stress and an unfamiliar environment. To occupy myself during the day, I decided to hike one of the marked trails Harold had mentioned. I found a crude trail map in a drawer and selected a path that led up to something called Lookout Ridge, which promised views of the entire lake and surrounding mountains. The map showed it as a moderate 3-hour round trip, perfect for keeping me busy but getting me back well before dark. The trail was clearly marked with blue blazes painted on trees, though in some places they were faded and I had to search carefully to spot them. The path climbed steadily, winding through dense pine forest. About an hour in, I realized the trees had changed, the pines giving way to older, gnarled hardwoods draped with hanging moss. The forest floor was carpeted with ferns and strange mushrooms that seemed to glow with an inner light despite the lack of direct sunlight. An unsettling thought struck me. I hadn't seen any wildlife since entering this section of forest. No squirrels or chipmunks, no birds, not even insects. The silence was absolute, pressing against my ears like a physical force. I checked the map again. According to it, I should be nearing Lookout Ridge, but the trail ahead seemed to be taking me deeper into the forest rather than up to any sort of viewpoint. I looked back the way I'd come, suddenly uncertain. Had I missed a turn? The blue blazes had been consistent, though, and I could see another one on a tree ahead. I pressed on, increasingly uneasy but reluctant to turn back when I might be just minutes from my destination. 20 minutes later, I was definitely lost. The trail had become increasingly faint, the blazes more sporadic. I'd been climbing steadily, so logic dictated that I should eventually reach some kind of ridge, but the trees around me showed no sign of thinning. I stopped, trying to control my mounting panic. The forest seemed different here. Older, primeval. The trees were massive, their trunks wider than my arms could encircle, their branches creating a canopy so dense that little light penetrated to the forest floor. The air was noticeably colder, and an odd mist hugged the ground, swirling around my ankles like curious cats. I took out my phone, hoping against hope that I might have signal here on the mountainside, but the screen showed nothing. I didn't even have GPS functionality. Stay calm, I told myself aloud, my voice sounding small and swallowed by the massive trees. Follow the blazes back the way you came. I turned, ready to retrace my steps, only to find that I couldn't identify which direction I'd come from. The trail, such as it was, seemed to have vanished, and there were no blazes visible on any of the surrounding trees. My heart rate accelerated. I was an experienced enough hiker to know that when lost, the best strategy was to stay put. But something about this place made that feel impossible. an oppressive wrongness that seemed to seep from the very ground. I picked a direction that I thought might lead back toward the lake and began walking, trying to maintain a straight line by keeping certain distinctive trees in sight behind me. After 15 minutes of hiking, I should have reached a familiar section of trail, but everything around me looked the same. The same towering trees, the same mist, the same unnatural silence. Then I saw it, a blue blaze on a tree about 50 yards ahead. Relief flooded through me and I hurried toward it. As I got closer, though, something seemed off about the mark. It was blue, yes, but larger and more irregularly shaped than the trailblazes I'd been following. I stopped a few feet from the tree, my relief curdling into fresh fear. This wasn't paint. It was some kind of fungus or moss, glowing with an eerie blue luminescence. And it wasn't just on this tree. Now that my eyes had adjusted, I could see patches of it on other trees around me, creating what could easily be mistaken for a trail if you weren't looking closely. A branch snapped somewhere behind me, the first sound other than my own breathing and footsteps that I'd heard in this part of the forest. I whirled around but saw nothing through the trees and mist. Another snap, closer this time, followed by what sounded like a low, rattling breath. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there? I'm lost and could use some help." No response, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I turned slowly in a circle, straining to see through the mist that now seemed to be thickening, rising from ankle height to swirl around my waist. Movement caught my eye, a dark shape passing between distant trees. Too big to be a deer, moving with a strange, lurching gait that was definitely not human, but not quite animal either. I began backing away, then stopped, realizing I had no idea which direction led to safety. The shape moved again, closer now but still obscured by mist and trees. It seemed to be circling me. "Stay back!" I shouted, trying to sound authoritative despite my terror. I fumbled in my pocket for my small canister of bear spray, the only weapon I had. A low chuckle drifted through the trees, the same chilling sound I'd heard in the cabin the night before. It came from behind me now. I spun around and caught a glimpse of something tall and thin stepping behind a massive tree trunk. Something that moved like a human but wasn't quite right. Its proportions wrong, its movements too fluid and yet somehow jerky at the same time. "David!" A voice called from the mist, soft and questioning. A woman's voice. "David, is that you?" I froze. The name from the Polaroid. It couldn't be coincidence. "I'm not David," I called back, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. "My name is Jessica. I'm lost. Can you help me?" "Jessica," the voice repeated, closer now. "Jessica, you look just like him." A figure emerged from the mist about 20 feet away. A young woman in hiking clothes that might have been fashionable in the late 1970s. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and dark in the dim forest light. She looked solid, real, but something about her made my skin crawl, a subtle wrongness I couldn't immediately identify. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "Who's David?" "I'm Elaine," she said, her voice flat. "David is my boyfriend. We came here with friends, to the lake." She took a step closer, and I noticed how she moved, smoothly, with no bobbing of her head or natural swing of her arms, as if she were being pulled forward on wheels. "He wandered off, into these woods. We found him, but he wasn't the same, and then the others started to change too." She was close enough now that I could see her clearly despite the mist. Elaine looked like the young woman from the Polaroids, but there was something off about her eyes. They didn't blink, and they seemed to reflect light like an animal's. Her skin had a waxy quality, and when she smiled, her mouth opened too wide, revealing teeth that were just slightly too numerous, too sharp. "What happened to you?" I whispered, unable to move like a rabbit hypnotized by a snake. "We became part of the forest," Elaine said simply. "Or it became part of us. It's hard to explain." She cocked her head at an impossible angle, her neck bending further than human anatomy should allow. "You should join us, Jessica." It doesn't hurt. Not for long." I broke from my paralysis and ran. I had no idea which direction I was going, only that it was away from Elaine. The mist swirled around me, trees looming out of the whiteness like sentinels. Behind me, I heard laughter, not just Elaine's voice now, but multiple voices, high and low, cascading over each other like water over rocks. I ran until my lungs burned, stumbling over roots and rocks, branches whipping at my face. The voices seemed to come from all around me now, calling my name, laughing, making promises in sing-song tones about how I could stay in the forest forever, how I would never be alone again. Then, miraculously, I spotted a legitimate trail blaze, the faded blue paint I'd been following earlier. I veered toward it, found another, then another. The mist began to thin, the oppressive silence of the deep forest giving way to normal woodland sounds, the rustle of leaves, the occasional bird call. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the tree line and found myself back at Shadow Lake, gasping for breath, my legs trembling with exhaustion and fear. I was on the opposite side from the cabin, the dark waters of the lake stretching between me and safety. I followed the shoreline, unwilling to re-enter the forest even on a marked trail. It took over an hour to circle the lake, and by the time the cabin came into view, the sun was already dipping toward the western mountains. As I approached, I saw someone on the porch, Harold Fletcher, the old man from the dock sitting in one of the Adirondack chairs as if he'd been waiting for me. "You went into the North Woods," he said as I stumbled up the path. It wasn't a question. "I got lost," I gasped, collapsing into the chair beside him. "The trail. The blazes led me there. I think I saw—" "Don't say it," Harold cut me off sharply. "Names have power in these mountains. Descriptions, too." He studied my face. "You're lucky. Most who go that deep don't find their way back, at least not as themselves." "What are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Harold was silent for a long moment. "No one knows for sure. They've been here as long as people have lived around Shadow Lake. Longer, probably. The Abenaki had stories about them, spirits that could take human form, that hungered for human essence." He sighed heavily. "Every few years, hikers go missing. Sometimes they're found, wandering the forest, changed in ways that doctors can't explain. Sometimes they're never found at all." "The photos," I said. "In the cabin, from the 70s. Harold nodded grimly. 5 college kids from Burlington. Only 2 made it back to town. One killed himself a week later. The other, a girl named Margaret, lived in Glover until she died last year. Never spoke about what happened, but she kept those photos. Must have left them here last time she visited the lake." "Why didn't you warn me more explicitly?" I demanded, anger momentarily overriding my fear. "You just said to stay out of the North Woods, not that there were—" I struggled to find words that didn't sound insane. "Entities that hunt people." "Would you have believed me?" Harold asked simply. "City folks never do. They think we're just superstitious locals. Besides, the cabin's safe, has been for decades. Whatever's in those woods can't, or won't, cross the threshold unless invited." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the previous night, the open door I'd found upon returning from the lake, the moved book, the photographs placed for me to find. "I need to leave," I said, getting to my feet. "Now. Before dark." Harold made no move to stop me. "Probably wise, though you should know, those that have seen them, been touched by them in some way, they often report visitations afterward, even hundreds of miles away." I stared at him in horror. "What are you saying?" "Just that distance alone might not be protection enough. They found you once, got your scent, so to speak. They're patient, and they're very, very old." I didn't wait to hear more. I rushed into the cabin, threw my belongings into my bag, and was in my car within 10 minutes. Harold remained on the porch, watching silently as I pulled away. In my rearview mirror, I saw him raise a hand in farewell, or perhaps warning. The drive back to Boston was a blur. I kept the radio loud and the windows down despite the chill, anything to keep myself alert and distracted from thoughts of what I'd experienced. By the time I reached my apartment, it was past midnight. I double-locked the door, checked all the windows, and then sat in the center of my living room with all the lights on until dawn broke. In the harsh light of day, in my familiar surroundings, what had happened at Shadow Lake began to feel distant, dreamlike. Had I really seen a woman from a 40-year-old photograph in the woods? Had she really moved in that impossible way, spoken of becoming part of the forest? Or had I, stressed and suggestible, experienced some kind of breakdown? I called in sick to work and spent the day researching Shadow Lake and the surrounding area. There were indeed records of hikers going missing over the years, though nothing that couldn't be explained by the normal dangers of remote wilderness. I found nothing about entities in the forest or hikers returning changed. I did find an article from 1978 about a search for a missing University of Vermont student named David Weber, last seen hiking near Shadow Lake with 4 friends. The search was called off after 2 weeks with no results. A follow-up piece mentioned that one of the friends, Thomas Callahan, had died by suicide shortly after the unsuccessful search. There was a photo with the article, the same 5 people from the Polaroids I'd found in the cabin. As evening approached, I began to feel uneasy again. I ordered takeout, unwilling to leave my apartment, and tried to distract myself with television. Around 9 p.m., as I was considering going to bed early, the lights in my apartment flickered. My heart nearly stopped. It was the same pattern as in the cabin. Once, twice, then darkness. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight just as I had that night. The beam illuminated my familiar living room, everything in its proper place. Then I heard it, a soft tapping at my 4th-floor window. I turned slowly, the beam of my phone highlighting nothing but empty glass. The tapping came again, more insistent. "No," I whispered, "you're not real. You can't be here." A low, multi-voiced chuckle seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Then, horribly, scratching at my bedroom door, the same sound from the cabin. A voice drifted through the darkness, Elaine's voice, but also other voices layered beneath it, speaking in unison. "Jessica," they called softly. "We found you, Jessica. We always find those who've seen us. And now you'll never be alone again." I sit here now, typing this as a warning. They're still here, 3 weeks later. The lights still go out each night at the same time. The tapping and scratching continue. Sometimes I see shapes moving in my peripheral vision. Tall, wrong-proportioned figures that vanish when I turn to look directly at them. Sometimes I find my possessions moved, arranged in patterns that almost form symbols. I've tried staying with friends, staying in hotels. They follow. I've tried telling others what I've experienced, but the words seem to twist in my mouth, coming out as mundane stories about night terrors or stress-induced hallucinations. Harold was right. They're patient, they're old, and they've found me. If you're reading this and planning a trip to Vermont's remote areas, especially near Shadow Lake or the Green Mountains, please reconsider. But if you do go, remember, stay on marked trails, be back before dark, and never, ever enter the North Woods. Because whatever lives there isn't content to remain in the forest anymore. It wants to spread, and it's found a way to follow us home.